Well, good morning, good morning, good morning. I am excited for this seminar, this workshop that we're bringing to you this morning. I am excited because I think it's so important that we understand how trauma can affect us, how trauma has been a part of our lives, and how we can use the experience of trauma to actually improve ourselves and move forward. I'm excited that you all are a part of this, and I'm looking forward to learning more and understanding more about trauma and how it affects our bottom line. Well, with that, I want to introduce to you the people who will be uh, leading us through this session today. Tamika Daniel and Summer Willow. Tamika, go right ahead, please.
Well, good morning. Thank you, Lamont. Good morning, everyone. We are excited to be here today as Kabod Consulting Group, LLC, myself and Summer Fitch are really excited to bring this content to you all today. Full disclosure, I am a former jump starter. So I served in the role as director of the KeyBank Business Boost and Build program out of New York. But I spent 4 wonderful years at Jumpstart and made some lifelong friends. So I'm very happy to be in the room with them again today, but then to also share my experience as a business advisor and consultant, but also as a multipreneur myself. And so I'm going to pass it over to Summer so she can introduce herself.
Thank you, Tamika. Hello and welcome to this amazing webinar, Trauma and How It Affects Your Bottom Line. My name is Summer Willow Fitch. I'm senior partner and principal with Kabod Consulting. I'm very happy to bring my expertise in training and entrepreneurial support to this forum. And we're so excited to really uncover trauma and give us all tools to move forward and be successful. All right.
So one of the things that's really important to us is when we're talking about issues or challenges related to trauma, is that there's someone in the room to offer on-site therapeutic support. Now, we're joining you virtually today, but even in our virtual sessions, we are honored and really grateful to have Danielle Santos, who's on our team, as our therapeutic support. So if you see the slide right there at the bottom, it says if you require immediate support during today's session, there is a phone number that you can call, and Danielle will jump off of the Zoom and attend to you in real time. I'm going to pass it over to Danielle so she can talk a little bit more about her work and how she'll be in support of you today.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Danielle Santos. I am a licensed social worker. I currently work at Johns Hopkins in the pediatric hospital, from emergency to inpatient on the psych floor to medical floors. I'm honored to be here today, and I look forward to supporting and serving you. I've been in the field over 20 years, so I look forward to connecting with you.
Thank you so much, Danielle. And everyone, I put her number in the chat as well. And so if, again, at any time during today's session, you feel triggered or you feel as though you need immediate support, you can dial that number and Danielle will be available for you.
Wonderful. So as we get started today, per usual in the webinar space, we want to talk about some housekeeping items. And as we talk about something so critical as trauma, we want to be aware that this is a subject matter that could very well create, I'll call it opportunity, right? We may be triggered, things may be uncovered, but we want to stay focused on how we will be successful and use this information in the future. So as you hear us sharing and training and you hear others share out, challenge the idea and not the person, right? We want to be mindful that everyone comes with their own lived experiences, and we want to talk through the ideas that we all bring to the table and move away from the individual. The stories stay and the lessons lead. That's similar to Vegas rules. But if someone is sharing something very, personal to them, and you're going to glean something from that, please do. Keep the story in your heart, right? Take the lesson with you. Use I statements. When you're talking about how you're affected by trauma, your experiences, and how you move through this world, you want to talk about yourself, and we want to be very clear that we are our mouthpieces and we don't speak for one another. So when you are speaking, use I statements and engage with an open mind. This may be new information for all of you, and for some of you, it may be difficult information to process. So engage with an open mind.
Thank you. And so today we will challenge ourselves to embrace discomfort. We say that first, and we say that in bold, because as Summer said, anytime we're talking about trauma or we're talking about lived experiences, positive or negative, there are going to be moments of discomfort. But in order for us to get to the healing part, in order for us to get to revelation, we have to be open to embracing that discomfort, knowing that it's going to lead us to the outcome we're all aspiring to get to today. Also is identify trauma triggers and responses. And again, if you need support to work through those triggers in the moment, you have Danielle to call. And again, her number is in the chat. But be aware of and identify when how you're feeling or how you're feeling you may want to react is a trauma response and not really your personal response. Be honest with ourselves and others. Honesty is the best policy. Acknowledge judgments and assumptions. And a lot of those will come up today. One of the things that we talk about a lot is the fact that our perceptions and our perspectives are formed within our experiences. And many of us have polar opposite experiences. But when we start to share those experiences, we can better understand how someone can form a perception or perspective, even if we don't agree with that perception or perspective. We're going to always assume positive intent and name the impact. When we do our trauma trainings, we talk very often about it's not so much about your intent as much as it's about how what you said or did impacted someone. So if you feel negatively impacted by something that someone has said, we want you to first shift your mindset into assuming positive intent, that person did not intend to offend you. But then also understand that we're creating a safe space here today where there is no judgment. And if you feel like you need to name the impact or name how that made you feel, then we encourage you to do that. And then finally, listen to understand and respond, not to react. This is something that many of us do. Many of us do. We don't listen. We don't listen to understand. We're formulating our responses as somebody else is talking, and we can't get the full gist of what someone is saying. And so we're asking you, and all of you are on mute right now, but there'll be time and opportunity for you not to be on mute, that when you are responding, ensure that you are responding and not reacting. So our learning objectives for today include provide a definition of trauma that includes systemic oppression, direct, historical, and intergenerational and collective trauma. We're going to delve into all of those aspects of trauma today. And then also to provide understanding about the prevalence of trauma and adversity within specific populations.
Today, we're also going to identify ways of understanding both individual and organizational thinking and behaviors. And finally, we are hoping that this training will help to reduce the number and the types of negative encounters and events, thus reducing the likelihood of re-traumatization. Back to that safe space we're trying to create. So we want to start off this training in a positive light. As we spoke earlier about trauma and how it can affect us in a negative way, how it can misalign us with our missions, and how it can maybe make us see things from a perspective, from a lived experience perspective versus our own inherent thoughts, right? Bottom line, trauma can trigger, and trauma can create a space that we don't necessarily want to reside in, but we move that way. Positive affirmations. I'm sure some of you may have attended group therapy sessions or support groups, whether it be entrepreneurial support groups or other support groups in your communities. But positive affirmations are things that we all use when we're talking about self-regulation and elevating our perceptions. And we want to go into this training looking at ourselves in a positive light, because whether or not we're understanding cultural context between one another or our lived experiences, we all are human beings. We're all here trying to make a difference and do our best. So in the chat, this is what I want you to do. I want you to start the day off referring to yourself in a positive manner. So for me, the rules are that you use the first letter of your first name and create an adjective, right, that describes you. So for me, I could be special summer or stupendous summer, but this is the way that I think about myself. And even if I come across a roadblock during this trauma, I'm going to revert back to the fact that I feel special and that I feel I am stupendous, right? And I'm going to get the most out of this. So I want you all to go into the chat, and I want you, Peter, perfect Peter, happy Hannah. I want you to go into the chat, and I want you to do this exercise with us. So let's just take a few minutes or seconds.
Hello, Karen Crystal. And Fierce, I hope I say your name right, Famida. You can't tell me. Thumbs up or hand raise if that was right. Loving Lamont. Oh, Lamont, you are loving. So that was right? I think that was right.
Reliable Raekwon. I love it.
Raekwon. Raekwon, have you been taking your Wu-Tang quizzes? We have a special joke between us. Yes, determined Danielle. I love that. Energized Eric, good morning.
Resilient Roseanne, perfect.
Charismatic Christine, good morning to you. Anyone else? Joyful Jody. Hi, Jody. You are joyful. Good morning. Do we have anyone?
One more. I know we can get one more. All right.
Oh, consistent
Courtney. Thank you for chiming in, Courtney. And once again, this is just a way for us to loosen up today, open up our minds and think positively about ourselves. The things we learn today may shift how we move in this world, and it's a great thing, but you are special, perfect, just as you are. All right, so let's jump into this training.
Okay. So we hear the word trauma a lot, right? Especially now, it tends to be almost a trendy word nowadays, right? We're talking about trauma a lot, but do we really know and understand what trauma is and how it manifests itself in our lives? And that's something we're going to talk about today. But in general, trauma can be defined as a psychological, emotional response to an event or an experience that is deeply distressing or disturbing. And it can be a single event. I'll give you an example. I use this example a lot. I was in a really bad car wreck last February of 2021. And in that car wreck, I was in a blizzard in a 40 car pileup. And it took about an hour for emergency and rescue to get to us. It took about 2.5 hours for them to get us off the highway. My car was almost split in half, and an 18-wheeler almost hit me. Seconds away from hitting my car and probably killing me, it stopped. That was an event that was traumatic. But the aftermath of that, even in the moment, was deeply distressing, but the aftermath of that is causing an experience, or has caused an experience in my life. And Summer's going to tell you the second part of that story during her time with you, because it's a pretty deep story. And then more often, it's multiple events over time, complex or prolonged trauma. And we see this a lot within marginalized communities, within communities where there is systemic oppression, and we'll pull back the layers on that in a moment. But usually trauma is something that happens over time. One thing that you'll notice here is that we don't talk about post-traumatic stress disorder. That was something that we heard a lot post-wartime, right? PTSD. We don't refer to it as that because post indicates that it's something that happened in the past. But as this says, more often than not, trauma is multiple, ongoing, recurring events that causes deeply distressing or disturbing experiences for us. It can also be interpersonal violence or violation, especially damaging at the hands of an authority or trust figure. Summer and I were talking the other day, and we were saying how we have an amazing circle of women that are our village or our tribe, as we refer to. And not one of them was able to say they had not been sexually assaulted or abused, either as a child or an adult. That is trauma. And it's interpersonal trauma because everyone said it was at the hands of someone they trusted. And then there's the 3 E's of trauma. It's the event, the experience, and the effect. And we can see here in this diagram, events are a circumstance that causes trauma, right? So my car accident, that was an event. It didn't happen every day for 3 years, but it was an event that caused an aftermath. Then there's an experience, and an individual's experience of the event determines whether it is traumatic. I had nightmares after. Summer can tell you it was very difficult for me to ride in a car as a passenger. She almost kicked me out her car one day. So an event can cause an experience in your life where I was never afraid to drive before. I live in Syracuse, New York. So saying I don't want to drive in the snow is like, well, then you're not going to drive for about 6 or 7 months out of the year. But it caused an experience in my life. And the effects of trauma include adverse meaning negative, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual consequences. So those are the 3 E's in trauma that we want you to be aware of. There's an event that can cause an experience that then doubles down into an adverse effect.
Absolutely. So let's talk about some examples of how that trauma, how those experiences manifest. So some of the examples of traumatic events or experiences are ageism, classism, racism, sexism, all the isms, hate crimes. My mother, for instance, my mother had a longstanding career here in Philadelphia, and she decided to move to North Carolina a few years ago. And she's semi-retired. And when she went to look for jobs, I had to experience a bit of secondary trauma with my mother from all of the no's that she was getting as she went out to apply for work because of her age, right? She was even told by one of the hiring managers that they didn't think she would last long enough in the department. So, obviously that was very traumatic for her. Abuse and neglect. You can keep going, Tamika. Bullying. Bullying is definitely a traumatic event that will carry out through your life and help you make decisions. Unexpected or sudden death are traumatic experiences. War. Physical and sexual assault. Domestic violence. Witnessing violence. And I spoke a little bit earlier about secondary trauma. You don't necessarily have to be the direct receiver of the trauma. You could actually witness trauma and be traumatized for a long time to come. I was telling Tamika yesterday when I was a child, and this is a very unfortunate example, but as a child, right outside of my church, right after choir rehearsal at night, I was walking to my car with some friends, and a gentleman was being beat to death. He was beaten to death with a bat in front of me. And that traumatized me so much so that I can hardly watch movies or TV shows to this day that are riddled with violence. Housing and food insecurities. That's a traumatic experience that shows up a lot in the school system. There are a lot of young children who are experiencing food insecurity, and they're coming to school unfocused, right? They're not nourished, they're unfocused, and it's affecting how they're learning. And then this diagram here is showing the different layers of trauma that we experience. So we talked about the direct trauma. Tamika talked about her car accident. That car accident happened to her, right? So that is her direct traumatic experience. And then there's another layer around that, and that's intergenerational trauma. It happened to my family. So let's talk about abuse in a family. Let's talk about poverty in a family. Those traumas happen to a family, and they're interwoven in the experiences of the family members. Collective trauma, it happened to my community. When you think about Wall Street, Black Wall Street, Rosewood, when we think about Central Park and how it was flooded, right? That was a community that lost everything, and collectively they experienced that together. And then we look at historical cultural trauma. It happened to my people. That trauma in particular is one that is really apropos for today as we talk about, entrepreneurs, Black and brown entrepreneurs, and in this business space, and how opportunities have been available to us. However, we have a collective experience where, because of who we are, because of how we look as a people, we've experienced trauma. Tamika.
So if you do any research on trauma, or if you want to, continue this conversation after it ends, I highly, highly recommend Resmaa Menakem. His book, My Grandmother's Hands. It'll change your life. It'll really change your perspective on a lot of things. So we refer to Resmaa a lot during our trainings. And this is just a little clip of him talking somewhat about the intergenerational trauma.
When we talk about traumas, one of the things that we have a tendency to do is start just in the personal, right? We start in the personal realm. What happened to me? And the reason why I'm acting like this is because this thing happened to me. We start in the personal, and the personal is important. But I also think that it's what I call HIP theory, HIPP. And that is that when somebody's personal traumas are triggered, usually it's not just the person. It is why people who have certain types of personal traumas, you can have one person who has the same personal trauma as you, but you get so overwhelmed by it that it incapacitates you. It makes you react in ways that seem like they're out of proportion to what it is that you're dealing with. And so I've come to the conclusion that many times when people are dealing with traumas, they're dealing with the historical aspects of it. There's some research that's coming out now that's starting to say that traumas actually can be transmitted up to 14 generations epigenetically, right, in the body. When that is going on, because trauma over time becomes decontextualized, we don't have a way of explaining these sensations or these vibes or these thoughts or these racings or these behaviors. There is no current language to describe why this much overwhelm is there. And so we figure out ways around it. And this is where I think it dovetails into addiction. When you can't explain the sheer grief, horror, and terror of something, you're going to try and find a way around it. Or you internalize it and think that something is defective in you. And so what I think is that there are historical aspects that we need to attend to. There are these intergenerational aspects that we need to attend to that get transferred down to us, not just by what people say to us in the story of the verbal story, but also in the nervous system story. How does my mother's nervous system react to something? And then how is that showing up in my mother's nervous system decontextualized? And then how do I learn that as personality or culture, right? And then there are these persistent institutional things that continue to reinforce it. And then you also have the personal trauma.
Go to KillitBeCenter.com, Radical Recovery Summit.
So I love that video and I love how he breaks down intergenerational trauma. Did you all understand what he said about trauma really living or residing in our nervous systems for up to 14 generations? And that's something that has been scientifically proven and is being talked about openly, is that trauma resides in our DNA. And so sometimes we have traumatic responses to things that didn't even happen to us or that didn't even happen in our generation. And I can share a personal story. Anyone who's close to me knows I am very claustrophobic, very, very claustrophobic. Like certain helmets I can't wear. Being on planes, I fly a lot, but it's difficult for me because that sense of being closed in and not being able to get out, I respond very unreasonably to feeling closed in or claustrophobic. I had a conversation with one of my aunts who's 90 something years old, whose grandmother was a slave. And I was talking to her one day about me being claustrophobic. And she said, well, baby, that just lives inside of you. And I was like, well, why does that live inside me, Auntie? And she said that back in the day, in the slave times, my great-great-grandmother used to often, she said, get put in the box. That was a way that slave masters used to punish slaves, especially women. They would get put in heat boxes out in the heat, unclothed for hours, sometimes days at a time. And she said that my great-great-grandmother was very feisty and she would often get called to the box. And at that moment, I wasn't well versed on trauma and how it resides inside of you or how it lives in your DNA. But now knowing that, and I'm not saying that's the only reason I may be claustrophobic, but I could never understand why I felt that way. So now I have the awareness that sometimes some of the responses that I have, often when they are unreasonable, is because it's something that didn't even happen to me, yet it's resting inside of my nervous system or it's resting inside of my DNA. So one of the things that we need to talk about are systems of oppression. And it's important that we talk about that universally. Yes, we very often talk about oppression as it relates to the Black experience in America, but there are systems of oppression that are working against a lot of different marginalized people. So the ways in which history, culture, ideology, public policies, institutional practices, and personal behaviors and beliefs interact to maintain a hierarchy. That's a system of oppression, and it's based on race, class, gender, sexuality, and/or other group identities that allows the privileges associated with the dominant group and the disadvantages associated with the targeted group to endure and adapt over time. We hear systemic oppression very, very often. We hear systemic inequities very, very often. And that is adverse to many people. There are specifically some people that it was named, it was put into law. And so we can't continue to have these conversations without being aware of those systems of oppression and how they have affected us and how they have traumatized us as a group.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the effects of COVID-19. And we talked earlier about collective trauma and the trauma that happens to a community. And Tamika just talked about or reiterated the idea that trauma can remain in your DNA for 14 generations. So let's talk about collective trauma. And this collective trauma is trauma that happens in large groups of individuals, and it can be transmitted across generations and communities. It can be caused by the pandemic that we have been experiencing over the past few years. Wars definitely are an example of collective trauma. The soldiers going out, the family at home, the children that are being raised without parents, parents that are lost or relatives that are lost in wars. That collective feeling of loss is collective trauma. Genocide and slavery are collective traumas that, to Tamika's point of the generational effects that we're feeling across our families, not understanding why we react in a certain way, why we have certain mindsets, why different groups have different cultural contexts. And it's because of this collective experience. Collective trauma can either be experienced firsthand or witnessed. Now, we talked about that before, but let's dig a little deeper. Let's think about the COVID pandemic, and let's think about all of the different new rules and regulations and stipulations put on our communities as a result of COVID. You know, for instance, we all have to wear masks now. You know, everyone's using hand sanitizer and nervous about, you know, collecting germs. Schools were closed down, which drastically changed the educational experience for young people and adults. People lost their jobs, right? During COVID, people had to shut down their businesses during COVID. And although this was a tremendous loss and it affected us all in a big way, right? In a very traumatic way, the opportunity there is that it was collective and that we all experienced it together, right? When we talk about cultural context and we talk about, you know, systems of oppression and we talk about discrimination and racism, there's a bit of separatism that happens, right? It's the system that creates the problem, right? And then there's the people that have to live through and navigate these systems. But in this case with COVID-19, we all experienced the same thing. We all had a loved one who lost a job. Many of us lost family and friends to COVID, and just, you know, kind of witnessed or firsthand experienced some of the effects of COVID. So collective trauma, we want to think about it as something that, yes, we all experience, and we experience it differently in our cultural groups, but it's also an opportunity for us to practice empathy because we're all in the same space together. And we have a short video that we're going to play that just kind of really, in a quick snapshot, goes over collective trauma.
I am an expert on behavior, and because children's behavior has become such an intrinsic part of everything that we're all dealing with, I have suddenly been asked to become an expert on COVID-19 and trauma, and I've done a lot of research and work, and because it's called novel coronavirus, it's because it's new. And we're all struggling to figure it out.
So as I've attended a couple of the trainings that you've done, I've heard you talk about COVID-19 as being a collective trauma. So I was hoping we could talk a little bit about what you mean by that and why that is so important for us to really recognize.
Yeah, the term collective trauma has been used a lot to describe the impact of this worldwide crisis. And it's having an effect on millions of people. And the term trauma typically refers to the impact that a traumatic incident has or incidents have on an individual or a few people. But collective trauma refers to the impact that a traumatic experience, which affects and involves entire groups of people, communities, or societies. And really, if we take a minute to look at what's happening, I think it fulfills that requirement. Collective trauma is also very extraordinary in that it's not only bringing distress and negative consequences to individuals, but it actually changes the entire fabric of a community. In fact, it can impact relationships. And as we've seen, it alters policies and governmental processes. It can alter the way society functions and even change its social norms. Basically, with a collective trauma, reality is turned upside down for a large number of people. And I think if you stop and look at the changes that we've all had to make between social distancing, wearing masks, sheltering in place, what's happening with children in school, going hybrid, going virtual, it has really had that impact.
So I hope that that video gave you some perspective about collective trauma. And as Summer said, one of the, if we can find a silver lining in COVID, is the empathy factor. We watched empathy in action when COVID happened. A lot of times people would talk about trauma in rooms with other people who hadn't really experienced something traumatic. They've had some bad things happen to them, but they couldn't identify trauma. They couldn't reason with it. They couldn't understand it. Well, COVID level set the trauma conversation for all of us, because as Summer mentioned, in some way, shape, or form, we were all traumatized, whether it was by a loss of job or watching family members lose jobs or becoming sick ourselves, becoming anxious, becoming depressed. In some way, shape, or form, all of us were affected. And as not just a nation, but as an entire world, we were experiencing that all together. That's collective trauma. So we want to talk a little bit now about immediate and delayed emotional reactions to trauma, because there are both emotional and physical reactions to trauma. So some of the immediate reactions that you may or may not identify with are numbness and detachment. I can speak on that personally. I'm a Cancer. So you hear about cancers going in their shells, very, very much so. I'm one of those people. When I'm feeling overwhelmed, or I'm feeling re-traumatized, I tend to either go numb so that I don't have to experience the feeling associated with what's going on, or I completely detach. I don't answer my phone. I don't show up to social gatherings. I completely detach. Anxiety or severe fear. And for people who are already experiencing anxious moments, or we're already experiencing bouts of depression, when something traumatizing happens to you, it exacerbates everything. So anxiety or severe fear, feeling out of control or overwhelmed. And we're going to talk about allostatic load in a little while, but overall, it's a feeling of being overwhelmed. How many of us felt completely overwhelmed by COVID? How many of us felt like our lives were completely out of control from day to day? We didn't know whether we were going to be able to leave our houses, if we could get a test, couldn't get a test, should I get the vaccine, shouldn't I get the vaccine? So many elements of our lives were out of control during the height of COVID. And then depersonalization, just kind of, again, detaching yourself from everything. But then there's also delayed reactions. There's irritability and or hostility. Remember when I said earlier that sometimes we have trauma responses and we don't even know where it's coming from? Because sometimes it's it could be something that happened a year ago. And now that trigger is coming up and you are responding unreasonably. Depression is a delayed response. Fear of trauma recurrence, right? So even now, I drive differently in the winter because of that accident that happened nearly 2 years ago now. I fear that could occur again. And that was a very traumatic experience for me. And then again, emotional detachment. I think that's a recurring theme for many of us. Many of us choose to just detach, right? How many of us say, I can't even deal? It's such a common phrase in our culture, but it's really a trauma response. I can't deal. I'm not dealing with this. I can't deal with it. Emotional detachment from anything that requires emotional reactions. And so let's imagine how that can affect us personally, our relationships with family, our romantic relationships, our professional relationships, when we make the choice to detach from anything that requires emotional reactions.
All right. And just like there are emotional reactions, there are physical reactions. So we're talking about how trauma shows up immediately in the physical. I am a sweaty palm girl. When I'm nervous, I do this a lot and my hands get sweaty. But sweating and shivering is an immediate sign that you're reacting to trauma. Elevated heartbeat, respiration or blood pressure issues. I have a character, a superhero that I think I am. I think I'm She-Hulk. Just so you know, if you see me on the street, you call me She-Hulk, I will answer. But when I get angry or when I get triggered, my heart starts racing instantly. I can't control it. And I feel like I'm about to morph into something different. I can't breathe. And I know my blood pressure is elevated. And for a long time, I just thought, hey, that just made me angry. But when I dug deeper and when I thought about and I reflected over my life and how other situations made me feel the same way, I could pinpoint the thing that triggered me, and there was trauma there. Extreme fatigue or exhaustion. So as entrepreneurs, there's this like ever running meme, like, sleep when you're dead, sleep is for suckers, you're supposed to work 24/7, right? And we're all tired. We're tired because it's Tuesday, let alone running businesses, raising families, creating businesses, right? Thinking for your future, right? But extreme fatigue or exhaustion, kind of to the point where you can't move, you can't focus or concentrate, right? That's a sign, a physical manifestation of trauma is tiredness, and greater startle responses, right? You're just easily, everything startles you. And not just the physical movement of being startled, but the feeling of being startled and connecting back to that racing heart. And those are all immediate reactions, but then there's the delayed side, sleep disturbances. I have a sleeping disorder I've had since I was 14. I also experienced a lot of trauma as a child. And I very, very rarely go into REM sleep, very, very rarely. So I have this delayed and prolonged negative experience with sleep. Appetite and digestive changes. How many of you, when you're stressed, when you feel triggered and your trauma is heavy, you can't eat? Or you're thinking, oh, my stomach hurts. You have this unexplainable stomach ache. That's trauma. That's trauma moving around inside of you. And the persistent fatigue is that extreme fatigue and exhaustion over time. You just cannot quell it. You just cannot get a good night's rest. And those long-term health effects are real because they're coupled with you losing sleep and your heart rate being elevated and slowed down and your blood pressure up and down. That's going to create those long-term health effects. So pay attention to how you show up in a room. Pay attention to what immediately happens or maybe what you think about later, because there's something there to be discovered.
Thank you. Now, time for a break. And this doesn't mean we're going to take a 10 or 15-minute break, but we want to break for a second from us talking to you to see if there are any questions that you would like to put in the chat that you would like for us to address ahead of us going forward. We also want to give some time and opportunity for some of you just to process some of the things that we shared today, because it may be bringing some things up for you. I want to remind you again that in the chat, and I'll put it in the chat once again, or Danny, if you can put your number in the chat again, that Danielle is available for you for therapeutic support. Some of the stories that Summer and I are sharing may be trauma triggers for you. And again, we want to be able to support you entirely through this session, not just with the content, but with the on-site therapeutic support. And so if you have a question that you would like addressed before we move forward, if you need to run to the restroom for a minute or two, now is your time to do it. So we're just going to hit pause for about 2 minutes. My clock says 9:45. So at 9:47, we'll resume our content. But again, we just want to give some time and space to absorb and process some of what we've shared already, for you to decide whether or not you would like to share out to add some value and context to the conversation, or if you just need a bio break, as they say. So we will return in about 1 minute and 30 seconds. Okay, I do see something in the chat. Great, thank you, Lamont, for your ongoing encouragement. Okay, if no one has any questions right now, I hope that you all had a moment to breathe, whatever rests your set or settles you, we hope that you feel settled now as we continue on.
And I'm back.
Mhm.
All right, so we want to illustrate how trauma is cyclical and how when trauma lives in a system or lives in your body, right? Because we have the personal you and the professional you, how you show up and how you engage can either push forward a trauma-filled agenda, right? Or we can move away from that and hit that target of success. So let's talk about the first step. Here's the inputs, right? There's the inputs, there's the trauma, there's the trigger. So let's look at an example of, say, you're walking into a bank. You're walking into a bank to get a loan. And as you walk into that bank, you're walking in with some predisposed trauma, right? You may have grown up in poverty. You may have an issue with your credit that causes you to pay more when you buy things, right? You have higher interest rates. Traditionally, your family hasn't received any loans. And you don't have much of a financial education or experience. But you know, you have this really great business idea and you want to walk into the door and you want to get some help, right? So that's your stance. And then you have the bank, because organizations can also operate in trauma, right? And they can operate through a lens or an experience that may or may not be reality for the bank. So let's just say that this bank traditionally declines certain folks with certain portfolios, so to speak. So when you walk into the door, and if you say, hey, you know, this loan will be open to you if you have at least a 600 credit score, right? So seeing somebody come in the door with a 550, that's somebody we're just not going to touch, right? We're just not going to touch it because as a organization, we have metrics, we have goals, we have things that we're held to, and we just can't even hear your story. We don't want to hear your story. So you have a system that's not willing to take you in or develop you, and then you have your own fears and your apprehension to really explain or really talk about the context of who you are. And because you're walking through the door with these traumas, you have these different perspectives and your different perceptions. You have a perspective about how the bank is going to treat you, right? And you may actually move in that energy. Energy is real. When you walk in the door thinking, I'm not going to get a loan, there's a possibility that energy alone will not get you that loan, because that energy, right? And it could be that trauma, right? That shaking, that nervousness, that fear, that lack of sleep last night, that could propel you into maybe operating out of your lower self, right? Maybe you don't give the best interview. Maybe you don't, disclose all the information necessary to get that loan. But you have perceptions of the bank has perception of you, you have a perspective of how you can win, and you're moving in that energy. So because you have that energy, so we're going to continue to move. There are specific supports and resources that are provided to you, and there are specific supports and resources that you will or will not access because of choice, right? And sometimes our trauma makes us feel like we're not worthy. As a business owner, we're not worthy to compete with a larger business. We're not worthy to, or we're not enough, and we're not able to sustain this business, right? So I'm not going to take hold of that resource. I don't think I'm eligible for that resource. I'm not even going to check into that, because I've heard through my community and our collective trauma is that they don't fund these types of businesses, right? Something to that effect. And then in terms of the resources and the supports that are provided, sometimes because of that collective trauma as an organization, you may or may not think that that community is in need of that support or that resource, or you may not totally understand the context of the people that you're serving. So the resources and the supports don't align with the communities that you're serving, right? And then finally, we get to the outcomes. And the outcomes are always the success or the metrics, you know, that we're trying to reach. And if this system, if this energy is moving in trauma, then the outcomes could be very adversely affected, right? Because if as a business owner, you're walking in the door with trauma, you have a perspective that you're not enough, that you can't win because of previous lived experiences and events, you have proven to yourself that that can't work for you, then you don't go after the things that you need, or you're not really educated or aware or have the support you need to move forward, then the success level may not be where you want it to be. Or even as an organization on the flip side, the supports and resources that you offer to your community may not give you the outcomes that you're looking for. Maybe you're not hitting the metrics that you'd like to reach because you don't really understand the context of the communities that you're serving because of the trauma, right? The trauma can be a barrier in communication. It can make you think that this is the reality, right? It can make you feel like this is how things are going to happen, but without communication and really understanding the context of the organization that you're going to, and then of the individual you're serving, you may be moving cyclically in trauma and operating your business through trauma.
I love that analogy. And to add something to that, a lot of times when I'll say we as entrepreneurs, because Summer and I are also entrepreneurs and business owners, are seeking out help, a lot of times that help is attached to some type of funding, usually grant dollars. And attached to that funding are metrics and goals and outcomes, which overwhelmingly are very unreasonable, right? But there's this desire to help people. There's this desire to bring in revenue into the organization. And so because of that, a lot of times engagements become very transactional rather than relational. Summer touched on banks. For many, many people of color, especially, or marginalized communities, our relationship with banks historically has been very strained. It has been, I make my deposit, I take my money out. I'm not going inside. I don't have a banker. I have 2 college educated parents. Where I lived in a middle-class community my entire life. I cannot remember one time ever my father saying or my mother saying that he was going to see his banker. I really don't even remember really going into a bank until I got my first job. Everything was done in the drive-through, right? And because of this, we go in looking for help, and we have our babies in our hands as entrepreneurs and business owners. I'm about to share with you my life's work, my passion, something that was birthed out of something traumatic that happened to me. And the first thing that happens when I sit down is you give me a pen and paper and tell me, fill this out. And so as business owners, again, that whole assume positive intent thing or whatever, but also naming the impact of how that made you feel in the moment. But then also as entrepreneurial support providers, it is critical that despite what unreasonable timelines we have attached to metrics and goals, we establish relationship. Because when we have relationship, when we have this environment of trust, I can share more of you, more of me with you, so then you can understand some days when I'm off, or you can understand why I'm responding this way to something. I shared with all of you that I'm very claustrophobic. I remember there were certain offices in Jumpstart that were really, really small. And I always felt uncomfortable in those offices. If you know that about me, then likely you're not going to schedule that room to meet with me, right? So addressing our traumas is a two-way street, but we all have to be open, but especially if we are providing support, whether you're a business owner mentoring someone, or you're an organization supporting entrepreneurs and small business owners, establishing relationship so that we can help to identify triggers when they're happening and respond to the whole incident and not just what's happening in that moment. If we don't establish relationship, we can never get to that part. And then it's really, really hard to get to the outcomes and success that we desire. Summer?
the ACEs pyramid. I'm talking, can you hear me now? um, this example, this graphic is illustrating the ACEs study, right? So the ACEs study examined how adverse childhood experiences, and that's what ACEs stands for, are related to the development of risk factors for disease through a person's lifespan from conception to death. And the study basically states that if you have experienced a certain amount of traumatic events in your life, that you move closer to death because of this, right? And it's not funny, it's actually true. So being predisposed to abuse, divorce, lack of education, food insecurity, homelessness, all of these things, all of these adverse childhood experiences kind of move you up this pyramid to where you have disruptive neurological development, right? And let me be clear. When you experience trauma, it alters your thinking, right? It just alters your thinking. You know, disrupted neural development is this big way of saying, hey, when you go through something that hurts you, it makes you feel a way and it makes you see things differently. So if this is happening all the time, it's ongoing, it's generational, right? It's going to really severely affect how you perceive yourself, how you perceive your reality, and what you can really do in your life. Moving further up this ladder, social and emotional cognitive impairment. Those who've experienced more ACEs, right, more adverse experiences, have more social and emotional impairment. And then that's when adoption of health risk behaviors come into play. Many of us who experience trauma in our lives look to substances to numb ourselves, to escape, to detach, to just not feel that pain anymore, right? If you're living a life of trauma, if you're living in pain, then you're going to adopt some behaviors that help you to escape, if only for a moment, right? So the likelihood that you would adopt a risky behavior heightens. Moving up, disease, disability, and social problems become more prevalent. And then finally, because or if there is trauma, prevalent trauma that's not addressed, it could send you spiraling.
I want to just touch on something one of our attendees said, Sade, and I hope I said your name right. She said the trauma and ignorance is real also. Now that we know something exists, the fear of asking more questions for help is there, because then we may feel like we have become the statistic. Many may have preconceived. So it's almost like I have these questions, but I'm almost scared to ask these questions because I feel like you're going to form an opinion of me. And that is so real. And then she said, and the cycle continues. And that is very, very true. And that goes back to establishing relationship where I can say, and a lot of us do this, I know I say this might be a dumb question, but right, it's almost like setting yourself up to not get rejected if they say this is a dumb question, but you should be in rooms where you shouldn't even have that worry that anyone would receive anything you ask as dumb. You should only choose to be in environments where your voice is valued so that you feel safe. We talk a lot about psychological safety. Many times it's more important than even your physical safety. Do you feel psychologically safe in this space? And that's one of the reasons why Summer and I set up these trainings, whether it's in person or work virtually, in a way that we kind of progressively bring on the more difficult content, but we always have someone at the ready, Danielle, to meet you where you're at in the moment, because we understand that all of this is relational and because we want to stop the cycle. So Sade, thank you so much for sharing that.
Absolutely. So at this portion, let's see, we're talking about trauma and social location. Tamika, you can take this one?
Yeah. So as Summer went over the ACEs pyramid, right? Maybe about a decade after, some groups got together and said, hey, this ACEs period, all true. It's all true. But we have to be aware and cognizant of the fact that we can't generalize trauma. That, as I mentioned earlier, there are polar opposite experiences that someone has, right? I tell the story very often. Summer is an animal lover. I'm an animal lover too, but like she is like a animal lover. Like she's the person that if she sees a cat in the road in distress, she will pull over and lay down next to the cat and sing gospel hymns to it. Like she's that type, right? And so I think that if Summer and I both saw a cat get hit by a car, we would both be startled, we would both be hurt, but she would be traumatized. That she would step into a different form of action. And I might even feel like that's not even your cat, that's a bit unreasonable, but for her, it's not, right? So even though we both love animals, how we respond to something happening to those animals are very, very different. And it's based on our experiences and things that we've seen. So what I like about the second pyramid on the right is that it is acknowledging generational embodiment or historical trauma. We touched on the fact that DNA can, that trauma can reside in our DNA for up to 14 generations. I want to just sit with that for a moment. So whether your family experienced slavery or exile or concentration camps or mass murder, and it didn't even happen in your generation or the generation before, that is still sitting on us, that is still a part of our personal trauma that we're dealing with today. And then social conditions and local context. And the first ACEs, if you dive deep into it, talks a lot about seeking counseling and getting therapy, which are all great in theory, but what about the communities that don't have those resources? What about the communities that don't have therapists that have shared their lived experience or look like them, or even more that I just simply can't afford? If I don't have health insurance, if I can't pay out of pocket. So we talk about these things like just get therapy and counseling, and those are all good things, but what about the communities that don't have access to those resources? Mm-hmm. And then also very often for marginalized communities, that ongoing trauma that we talked about, that complex trauma, that's our base. It's not like this thing that happened in my childhood, right? I saw somebody die, or to Summer's point, like that one thing happened. But I also know that, Summer lived in Philadelphia. I lived close to Philadelphia growing up. We heard about murders and people getting hurt. We buried more friends in our 40s than people have in a lifetime. It is complex trauma. Our baseline is different. And then the allostatic load, which really is a cumulative burden of chronic stress and life events. Whether it's happening to you or you're watching it happen to someone else, or you feel stuck in a situation, in an environment, in an experience that you can't get out of, it is that sense of overwhelm that never goes away. There are times that I don't like to say struggle anymore, live with depression. And very often when I'm in the deepest or darkest points of that depression, and often when I'm talking to Summer about it, the way that I categorize it is I feel like I'm in the middle of the ocean treading water with sandbags tied to my ankles. That feeling of doing so much, I'm doing so much just to keep my head above water, and I'm always feeling like I'm constantly sinking. That also disrupts our neurological development. And then when we talk about the comparison between, on the left side, adoption of health risk behaviors, are coping mechanisms that Summer talked about. And many times in marginalized communities, our coping mechanisms are criminalized, where in other communities, they are sent to rehab. It's a health condition. But in many marginalized communities, the way that we choose to cope is criminalized. So on top of our coping from our trauma, some people end up in jail. Let's just be real about it. And then the burden of disease. It's one thing to be sick. It's an entirely other thing when you don't have the resources or the money to treat your illness. And then you're watching your family watch you die, and there's nothing you can do about it. And on top of that, you're sick. Criminalization, as I said, stigmatization, and then again, early death. So it is really important that when we're talking about ACEs, Again, the left side is very apropos, it's very generalized, but we have to acknowledge the social conditions, the generational embodiment, the allostatic load that happens to so many marginalized communities.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So then we go to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And you can Google this. We like to talk about this because we also like to level set conversations, right? So as Summer talked about COVID, level setting the trauma conversation, there are some needs that all of us innately have, right? Regardless if you're marginalized, if you're Black, white, if you're brown, if you're a woman, if you're a male, if you're non-binary, whatever it is, right? We all have these innate needs, and they're physiological needs. We all need air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing. Safety needs, we talked about that, psychological safety as well as physical safety, and that's our personal security, employment, resources, love and belonging. Even the meanest of people really need love and belonging. And a lot of times their quote unquote meanness is a reaction to the fact that they're not getting that love and belonging. So that friendship, that intimacy, the sense of connection and family, we all desire that, whether we say it or not. And then esteem, respect for myself first and foremost, and respect from other people, our self-respect, our status, our recognition, our strength, feeling free is something that all of us desire to have. And then also self-actualization is the desire to become the most that one can be. And what we want to strongly encourage you today, that especially when you're involved in interactions or engagements that are negative, that are stressful, that are strained, that you remind yourself that that human being on the other side of you has the same needs I do. The way that they are responding to what I'm saying, the way that they deliver on the message that they need these things might be different, but at our core, we all have Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Absolutely. And we're getting ready to move into a panel, but I just want to quickly go over this slide. So the cultural context to trauma looks different for everybody, and that's the end, right? So if you look at this kind of word cloud in the shape of a heart, right? Because we want to exercise love, you see that there's so many different groups represented here. And these are all marginalized groups, right? And we're talking about low income, senior citizens, felons, immigrants. You can read it and see that there's several groups and many groups not even mentioned here that are represented in our various communities. And when we talk about cultural context, let's simplify again. I'm into simplifying things in order for us to move forward. So in simple language, context is the setting. It's the setting of an event or the setup of an event. You can think of context as all the information that you need to know to truly understand something. So all the information that you need to know about these groups to truly understand them lives and resides with them. And you're going to be more successful at building those relationships that Tamika was talking about earlier when you consider someone's context. And I'll end this section here with a little story. So I like to watch movies, and I'm sure many of you do as well. But when you're watching a movie by yourself and you start at the beginning, you know what it's about. You know where it's set in, you know who the characters are, their names, why they're acting the way they're acting, but then enters the other person that's in your home, right? At the 30-minute mark. And they want to sit down next to you and watch this movie with you, but they don't understand the context. And when you don't have context, what it breeds is disruption and confusion. And that person is going to say, why is he doing that? Or what happened there? Well, why are they doing that? Right? Because they don't understand the context. And the best way to understand the historical context of any group or the cultural context of any group is to understand the story from beginning to end. And that's where relationship building intersects. Having conversations and understanding one another's position and why we are where we are and do what we do. So we wanted to move into our panel segment and really hear from some entrepreneurs and find out about their experiences with trauma and how it has affected their bottom line. And today we have three amazing panelists who are here to share their stories. We have Alicia Ellis of Mas Luray, Waverly Willis of the Barber Institute, and also Angela Flowers. Angela Flowers, I'm so sorry, I don't have your information right here. Angela, don't kill me. Angela, I want you to come on first because my screen just went blank.
Good morning.
Hi, Angela. Thank you so much. I'm having a little technical difficulty here. But Angela, please introduce yourself, your organization, and what you do.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Angela Flowers, and I'm the co-owner of Making a Difference Consulting. We provide educational resources for children, youth, and families, as well as workshops and just the different development for small businesses, nonprofit organizations, and school districts. So we are a mental health provider. So I am a licensed independent social worker.
Thank you, Angela. And Waverly. Waverly, please tell us about you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Waverly Willis. I'm the proud owner of Urban Cuts Barbershop, which has 3 locations. Executive director of the Urban Barber Association, which is a network of a nonprofit network of barbershops and salons around Cleveland. And we do different things to positively impact our environment. And I'm also an instructor at La Barberia Institute of Hair.
Awesome.
Welcome. Thank you. And Alicia.
Awesome. Glad to be here. My name is Alicia Ellis. I am the founder and creator of Mas Luray, which is a multimedia platform. We do podcasts, blogs, events. I'm also a new published author. You know, I have my book on deck, guys, because I do not play those games. I'm new published author of Complete, and I also am the visionary founder of our newest initiative about 10 months in called Ignite with Light, which is a network of entrepreneurs, innovators, and creators, specifically in communities of color, looking to share resources, empower each other, peer-to-peer learn, and exchange just support for one another. So I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alicia. And feel free to put information about how we can get your book in the chat. And that goes for all of our business owners, our panelists. If you could share your website address or how we can get in contact with you after today, that would be really helpful for all of us. So Alicia, thank you very much. Before we dive into the questions, I want to bring something up that may help to strike your response. One of my mentors said one time on a panel discussion that struggle and or lack breeds innovation. And she talked a lot about how so many of our businesses, our visions, our dreams that we turned into businesses were birthed out of something negative that happened in our life, or even something positive and we wanted everyone to share. But very, very often it was birthed out of struggle. And we hear a lot of stories of business owners or entertainers spending seasons of their life sleeping in their car, or having nothing, or eating bologna sandwiches every other day. So I would love to hear from you is what caused you to bring your business to life? What was that thing that went off that you decided this needs to be a business? And this can go to whoever wants to answer first.
Go ahead and start. So my business kind of stemmed, I didn't originally go into being a business owner. And so it stemmed just from some of the different issues and things that I had gone through as a child. It was bullying, it was having some weight issues, parents using drugs and alcohol, but also too, just being the person that I knew that I needed when I was in school. And so I ended up starting the business with 2 other young ladies, Dakota King White and Malika Watley, who were also working in different school districts. And we saw that there was an unmet need, whether it was mental health services, whether it was lack of social skills and support for the young people and the families that we were working with. And so because we had all been through similar situations and being Black therapists, the connection there was to provide the support and resources that we needed when we were young, but also in the marginalized communities to make sure that adequate healthcare and mental health services were available.
Awesome. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
I'll jump in here and in the sense of kind of my story to that. When I was young, I suffered from a speech impediment. And so growing up in school, I was always pulled out of class to go to speech classes. And that really hindered my academic growth in the classroom all the way up into college. And so once I finally got caught up as an adult, had to teach myself vocabulary, teaching myself how to read as an adult, because I was just so behind. I went to nearly 10 different schools up into the 9th grade. And so those challenges created a lot of trauma for me growing up. And I wanted to create something where people can share their stories. And so I got a lot of training. I, just really got the confidence of speaking in public over time. And through launching Mas Luray, I really saw a need to take ownership in our narrative in our communities. What we saw during the pandemic was a lot of negative, really dark, heavy content being produced constantly from the news. And I knew a lot of people like Angela, like Waverly, who was having a positive impact in their community and was really the hands-on during the pandemic when organizations and corporations were shut down. It was the community leaders and grassroots leaders that was still working. And so I wanted to create safe spaces to help share and amplify our voices during that time. And now it has just evolved over the last couple of years. It's continuing. I'm just sharing and connecting with other folks.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. Waverly?
I have a very traumatic story about why I became a barber. I do a lot of different things, but barbering, cutting hair is definitely my first love, but it came out of necessity. When I was a kid, my mom used to cut. My mother, Wardell Willis, God bless her soul, she was the single parent of 3 boys and 1 girl, and she used to cut my hair, and she did a very, very bad job at it. When I would get to school, the kids would all laugh, point fingers, and make jokes about my haircuts all the time. And so I remember it like it was a nightmare, like yesterday. She sat me down for my bi-weekly haircut, and I was probably like between 8 and 10 years old. And I just, as she was approaching me with clippers in hand, I grabbed her wrist and I said, "Mom, can I just please cut my own hair?" And she said, I don't care who cuts your hair as long as it gets cut. And unfortunately, I did the same bad job as my mother did. Same results. Kids were still laughing, pointing fingers, and making jokes about my haircuts. But I kept practicing at it, and the same kids that were laughing and pointing fingers were discreetly pulling me to the side, asking me if I could cut their hair. And my mom's basement soon began to be filled with kids from the neighborhood, as well as kids from my school on Saturday mornings. I was charging like $3 a head, and my mom would count all the kids coming in and out of her house, and she would charge me $1 per person for her electricity and the use of her venue. And so to tie this all in with this panel discussion, I guess it was trauma. It was, as you know, kids can be relentless. And so they really tore me down about my haircuts. And I think that deep down, that's why I do so much haircuts in the community, especially at rec centers, churches, things of that nature. So, because I know what some of these kids are going through when they're dealing with mom cutting their hair at home. So I appreciate you guys kind of tying that in. I'm having aha moments here.
Waverly, thank you so much for sharing your story. I spent a lot of time in Cleveland, and I would see your name and face all over the place, especially within the community. So I love that you're paying it forward. And as my grandmother used to always say, baby, success is the best revenge. Mm-hmm. So the same people that were teasing you and laughing at you were then sitting in your chair. And so that transitions us to like, now your businesses are flourishing. Mm-hmm. Right, you have highly successful businesses, but now we've kind of level set this conversation that for all of you, in varying degrees, your businesses were birthed out of a struggle, or out of a need, or out of some type of trauma. So can you speak to how you were showing up in the early days of your business when you were still really sitting in that, versus how you're able to show up as a business owner now that you're successful and you're flourishing?
For me, I know that in the early days, I definitely had trauma responses to growing up in poverty, and just overworking myself. So making sure that things were done, I wasn't utilizing resources and asking for support. I felt like I needed to do everything by myself and on my own. And so I know it was a trauma response because I never wanted to feel like I felt when I didn't have, when I was growing up in poverty. And so for me, it was like, I'm going to make this business successful. I'm going to put whatever time it is. The saying in our community, no days off. I was literally living that exact saying, like, okay, no days off, not taking vacations. And of course, me being a mental health professional, I know self-care was so important, and I just wasn't putting in the time for myself. And I was burnt out in the first 3 years. And so I had to refocus, realign my values, but then also say, you know what? I need support as well. And so I no longer show up that way. And I definitely make sure I'm vacationing and I'm building in time and support for my team, but also for myself as well. And so just the experience of just not having and just living in poverty, though, it still sits with me, but I'm aware. And that's important, just being aware of what it is and knowing what my triggers are. So then I'm able to then make a different decision.
And that piece is so important. And Alicia, I'm going to come to you next. It's so important as entrepreneurs. And this goes back to cultural, right? Or collective or community trauma, that whole no days off, like Summer said, sleep when you're dead, and that expectation to always be working and always be excellent and always be pleasant and always have the best customer service or else. Right. So that's really difficult. When Summer and I are working with business owners in the capacity of consultants, we encourage them very, very strongly to write self-care into their business plan. Why? Because it's going to hold you accountable. So for many of us, we want to make sure everything in that business plan to the T is done and executed, even when we're ignoring or neglecting ourselves. So it's almost a mind trick, right? To put it in your business plan so that you identify that this isn't just something I'd like to do, it is a business need so that I can continue to operate in excellence. So Angela, thank you so much for sharing that. Alicia?
Yeah, I definitely second what Angela was saying in the sense of poverty and just that mindset going into entrepreneurship. I started my first venture in 2015. And I went through a lot of training. I was not well put. I didn't know etiquette. And I had to really get into myself of that cultural that we hear in our community, like change. Oh, you're brand new, or you changed on us. Like it's a negative connotation when we think about change. For me, I had to isolate myself for years. Early on, as I went back to school, and I just had to dive deep into who am I really? Who am I? You know, when I pull back these layers of trauma, of poverty, of fear, of generational curses, what a lot of us say, when I pull back those things and I take away those identities that I was born into and then grew up in, I take those away. Who am I at the core? And so I had to really learn me. I had to discover me. And I went through a lot of training. I have like 10 plus certificates in professional development, etiquette, entrepreneurship accelerators. When I got my MBA, it was all of that equipping for me that really had to change my mindset. Like I had to like be reconfigured in my mind and in my spirit ultimately to discover who I am. And so it was those things of, you know, the fear of being poor, like growing in that, and generationally, I did not want that at all for my life. I don't think anybody does. So when I had the opportunity to really hustle and take what I had, my talents and my ideas, and monetize those things, I saw it as a way out, right? We hear about sport athletes coming out and saying, this is my way out. I think for us as entrepreneurs, we see this as a way out of poverty. And so for me, even now, I still struggle with that fear of like, man, what I got to do to like, by any means necessary, right? And that's also unhealthy. You know, I realize that now more than ever that this is an unhealthy practice that is always in the back of my mind. Sometimes I go days or weeks or months without thinking about it. And then it haunts me for hours at a time. Like, oh, you got to do X, Y, and Z, like no days off, like Angela was saying. So it's been a lot of that training to get me to a point now that I'm on the trajectory going up. There is no going back. Like, God didn't bring me this far for me to go backwards, but to continue striving forward. And it's just certain practices of, self-belief and love. And I heard you guys talk about like the belonging and loving, like that attribute for us growing up in these environments of poverty. There wasn't really much time for that in some situations. So now just giving myself permission to be successful, giving myself permission to love myself and to be loved has really changed my whole outlook on life. So definitely a lot of those things that I've had to just recondition myself, unlearn behavior, generational things, and just really saying, I deserve where I'm at now and I deserve where I'm going. And that has just helped me, especially in this season, as things just pick up more and more, and just giving myself permission that you're destined for greatness. Like, that's not something that's looked upon lightly, but a challenge that I've accepted over the years to say, I'm going to be all that I was designed and created to be. And that's what I really strive for each day.
Absolutely.
I love that. Waverly.
I think that where I'm at today is attributed, number one, the God definitely has carried me this whole time. And when I look back, I really had some really lean times, as we all have. But my mom, she was the type of woman, she wouldn't give you no money, but she would feed you, So I would wake up on a Saturday and some dude down the street that was hungry is sitting in my dining room, So the spirit of charity and looking out for the community has, I guess, is in my DNA. So like Angela said, the no days off mantra was definitely a thing for me. I was at the shop from early morning to late night. But at the same time, I always made sure that I was on Sundays at a church, at a rec center, take a break throughout the day and go do 10 kids at the neighborhood daycare center. And I was just doing what's in my DNA. But then that's when the news was calling, because they heard about this guy cutting hair. And I always try to plant that seed of giving in my students at the school before they go out and start making the money. I'm telling them it's not always about a dollar. My personal mantra is, if God has willingly given you a gift that you can support yourself, in my opinion, it is your duty to in turn share that gift with the world for free. Not all the time, maybe not on the level that I do it, but you should share that gift for free, because it was freely given to you and it can easily be taken away from you. So I just never knew or thought that my territory would expand the way that it did. And so now I know that I can go to a daycare and charge the parents $15 or $10 a head to cut the kids' hair, but nobody's going to remember that. If I go to the daycare and say, I'm going to cut everybody's hair for free, that's when everybody pulling their phones out, they going live, they tagging me. And that advertising costs money, you know what I'm saying? And so that's really how I expanded my territory and to where it's at today, is just by giving. That's it. Just simply giving.
Simple.
I love that.
Waverly, that was an amazing way to just encapsulate the humanness of being an entrepreneur and the spiritual value of following your purpose. And I want to stay in this space right now just for a second, because there are a lot of entrepreneurs on this call and who are going to see this, and they're in that beginning middle stage, right? They haven't necessarily gotten to the places that you all are. But I remember the aha moment when I realized that every single business that I patronized was started by an entrepreneur. I don't know why I thought like organizations were these machines and that there wasn't like this one guy or this group of friends that got together and said, hey, let's start Wells Fargo, or hey, let's start Best Buy. I didn't see it that way. And when it finally clicked to me, I'm like, okay, that's when I started to read books by people who own these businesses, because essentially I found a connection point. I'm like, I'm a human trying to start a business. That's a human that tried to start a business. Let me see what they did so that I can model that and you know, do what I want to do, serve that purpose that's in my heart, like that purpose that you were talking about, Waverly. So I want to stay here and talk about this for the entrepreneurs that are listening, and just talk about the supports and how you navigate it from, you know, walking into the door with this trauma and maybe, you know, not operating optimally because, you know, to Angela's point, I don't want to delegate, you know, this is my baby, I can't let you touch it. But then that causes you to produce slower, right? Or not hit your deadlines. But like, what supports did you enlist in your entrepreneurship journey in order to bring you to this point today? Let's start with Angela.
Thank you. For me, I've been a business owner now for 15 years, but I've been a full-time entrepreneur for 12. So we just celebrated 15 years last weekend. And so I'm the only one in my actual business that's the full-time entrepreneur. Everyone else has like a 9-to-5 job, which is fine with my other co-owners. But for me, I realized back in 2015 that I needed some support. Some additional support. Like I said, I had went through the phase of being burnt out, but then I said, how can I scale up and be able to replicate what we are already doing, but to have some additional resources? And so I ended up finding an advertisement for Jumpstart and this core CD program. They were going into their second cohort. And I had 3 days to apply. And I said, I'm just going to do it. And so I applied, and they accepted 5 other people into our particular cohort. And what that did for me was it gave me some additional resources that I had no idea about. I didn't know that it was all of this entrepreneurship support in Cleveland, but I also recognized that knowing my numbers was important, but actually recognizing who my core audience was. So they had us doing all of these different activities that was customer discovery and just being able to learn how to do a professional business pitch. And so that support helped me go from 3 contract employees to now 21. So in that time frame. And so we were able to then put some systems in place to replicate, but I also was able to recognize the importance of having written policies and procedures and being able to have the business operate if I'm not there, and creating that succession plan. And so those particular resources opened up the doors to me utilizing like the Urban League and ECDI and the Women's Business Center, but knowing that there's all of these other resources that are ready and willing to help, especially minority and women entrepreneurs, it opened up my doors, and I just started sharing the information with other entrepreneurs. And so in a sense, all of my contract employees are entrepreneurs as well. And so by me learning different things, I was able to spread the information to them, and then also create another program for our company called Youth Biz Academy, where we teach young teenagers how to be entrepreneurs. And so just having the resource and just having someone take a chance with my business opened up doors to additional funding, whether it was through investors, whether it was through additional grant resources, but it gave me that awareness and support that people really do want to support minority businesses. It's just more so building the relationships and knowing where to go to find those resources.
Wonderful. Wonderful. You know what? I thought of lyrics to, I don't know what song, but it keeps popping in my head. Innovation causes expansion. I write my rhymes while I cool in my mansion. I don't remember who that is, but that innovation, right? You stretching yourself in that way just expanded your business in a major way. So kudos to you. Waverly, talk to me.
Okay. While I was on my journey, we all have room for success. So my territory is expanding, but you know, I'm a human being, I'm an entrepreneur, so I'm never making enough money. Bill Gates gets up in the morning and still goes to work, right? So I'm saying to myself, I need to polish myself up, Then I hear about this organization. Actually, I saw one of my friends on Facebook with a big check in her hand, and it was from Jumpstart. Betsy, my girl Betsy, who had Simply Betsy. And I contacted her about it. She started telling me about Jumpstart. I think I called down there and I talked to Lamont, who's my guy. Him and Patrick at the time was my main guys down at Jumpstart. And so they convinced me I did my investigation through other entrepreneurs, and I really started engaging with Jumpstart, and they gave me a lot of nuggets. And I know that they'll never admit it, but I drove Jumpstart crazy because I was asking all types of questions, but I didn't care because I needed the knowledge and I needed the polish. And through Jumpstart, not only did they give me nuggets about business, they helped me expand my network of knowing other entrepreneurs. And so they helped me with the relationship. I went to Urban League. I went to the President's Council and United Black Fund of Cleveland. And so I'm always on a continuous quest to just improve my knowledge base and improve my network so I can, know I can be invited on Alicia Ellis's show. When I went on her show, that expanded my territory even more, and I plan on doing more or getting more engaged with Mas LeRae and all the activities from Ignite with Light. So it's been great. It's always a continuous journey. And one thing I tell my students is always remain teachable, because it's always room for improvement.
Yes.
I love that. I love that. So true.
That's
Alicia,
huge.
how about you?
You can tell we're not
Yeah.
just fellow entrepreneurs, but we ride together in this space. I featured both Waverly and Angela's story on our podcast and platforms as well. I would say I didn't grow up hearing the word entrepreneurship. I grew up hearing hustlers. I grew up around hustlers from legal and illegal activities. And until I got to my young adulthood, I started hearing entrepreneurship. And as I was trying to figure out what I wanted to study in school, and like I said, that whole transformation and transition for me, I came across entrepreneurship and business, and I minored in it, and I got an opportunity to do a pitch competition my senior year doing my BA, and that opened up a whole world for me. That was 2016. We got to compete with the top universities in Northeast Ohio. It was a 5-day week. And I got to meet other young-minded entrepreneurs and people who are already in their business. And it was just wow, this is what I've been missing. This is what I've been looking for, that tribe of other people who are creative, who are young, who are not taking no for an answer. And from there, I got connected with Christopher Smith, who's now at Jumpstart. At the time, he was at Operation Hope, and I did his program. And me and him just clicked, and he was like, you got to get connected with Jumpstart. And so long story short, I also went through the Core City Impact program in 2017. And what that did for me was give me the confidence to use the word entrepreneurship, to coming out of that hustler mindset. Well, yeah, I think we all hustle, but it's a mindset also that comes from being a hustler versus an entrepreneur. And so really looking at entrepreneurship, that it gave me the confidence to be wow, I can get in a room and persuade everybody that they need to invest in me, why they should invest in me. I have all of this to offer, and you leaving the room, you'll be crazy not to buy in to me. And I believe that Jumpstart really created that space. And I too was a headache. I'm still a headache to them because we're not just clients, but we're also a part of the ecosystem. Like Angela mentioned, she has an initiative helping youth. Now we're patronizing each other in the organizational sphere of ecosystem to say, hey, these are resources that are available for us. And I think that was the big aha moment. From there, I went on to other programs and did other accelerators. And now with our initiative is sharing with our community, hey, it's free money. In the first 3 years, I raised $50,000 of free money for the startup I had in 2015. So I was going back and telling my cousins and friends, yo, go get this check. It's $5,000. It's free. Like, and that was like, I would still have people not even take advantage of those opportunities. So it just opened up a lot to my eyes, or for my experience. And like, there's endless amount of resources. It's more about how they're distributed. It's not about access, because we all have access. It's about where the dollars are at and how they're being distributed to our communities of color specifically. So I just that support, and now building our tribe of support of other entrepreneurs to say, we need to support each other. What are you learning? What has been your failures and your successes? And just creating that village of support. Like it says, it takes a village to raise a child. It does that for business as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great point. And it's going to segue me to the next question. But before I do that, I know that Angela has a time constraint, and I just wanted to time check with you and see if you wanted to. You're good? One more question? All right. So Alicia, you brought up something simple yet profound. And we're talking about that ecosystem, that entrepreneurship ecosystem. And it causes you to level up. It definitely does. And if you're in a space as a new entrepreneur, and or maybe you're in ideation, you're a little timid about stepping into the market, right? But there's apprehension. You need to surround yourself with like minds. That's a real thing in any profession. But you talked about you and Angela also talked about the things that you glean from these entrepreneurs, the things that you learned on how to make your business better. And I want to return to the forum, to the topic of this forum, and how this trauma affects your bottom line. And I'll start by saying that one of the things that Tamika and I experienced as we formed Kabah and as we were kind of moving through our life cycle as business owners is pricing. Right? We all deal with it, especially in the consultant space. It can get a little tricky. And pricing can be directly linked to trauma and that feeling of enoughness. And that feeling of, I have the education I need, or I have, the specific certificates or degrees that I need in order to step out into this space. But truly, the 1% of the most, elite folks in this world, a lot of them don't have a degree or don't have any certificates, right, to validate, or they didn't enter the market with those certificates, right? They entered it with all heart and maybe somebody saying, hey, you could do it, right? Or maybe not. So I want to just go back to how trauma affects your bottom line. And I want you to identify a trauma that you really struggled with. Ours was pricing, right? Because we work.
I think she might have got kicked off.
I believe she did. This is Lamont. I'm just stepping in for a say. Oh, they're back. Okay. All right.
Yeah, my laptop is trying to die on me too. So I think what she was going into was, our trauma responses to our business decisions, right? And can you pinpoint any of your business decisions, especially early on, that were really made as trauma responses and not as effective and sustainable business decisions? Who would like to take that first?
I can jump in here. I have a lot of these stories. I can probably write a book about the amount of stories I have from trauma responses and as it relates to business. One I would say early on was doing work that I really had no business doing just for the check, right? Because of that survival mindset and because I was fearful of being poor or going backwards, I would do things because it looked glossy and it provided revenue coming through the business. And so I did a lot of those to the point that I had to really stop myself from accepting, some opportunities because I knew that it didn't align with where I was going or where I wanted to go, where I saw myself. For an example, early on, we had one that was $20,000 that you was a project. It was very short project, but then it turned into from a 12-week to a 6-month thing. And then before we knew it, we were coming back for a whole year, all on this $20,000, right? And there was a point of time, like I had to stop me and our partners from saying, okay, we can't do this anymore. Like, this is so bad for us, not just from a financial standpoint, but it became physically taxing on our bodies. And so knowing as women, statistically, we put everyone before ourselves, right? Especially women of color. And before we know it, we're unhealthy. And so I started seeing that those practices in our business, and I just knew like I had to draw a line. I couldn't continue accepting opportunities that I really had no business doing, because it wasn't what my business was aspiring to be or where it was headed. And so just taking that whole fear of, I was gonna say fear of missing out, which is a big thing now, but it was more of the fear of not having enough coming in, and making sure that the revenue was meeting where we were growing. And so just some of those examples of how that trauma response affected my bottom line, and now just being very strategic on the things I say yes to, and the things I say no to. I think us as people, we have to set boundaries, not just personally, but obviously within our businesses too.
I'm back. Thanks, Alicia, for jumping in and answering that question.
To piggyback on what Alicia just said, which was so profound, like being able to say no. When you say no, you're saying yes to something else. So it allows you to open up additional doors. And for me, pricing in the beginning of the business was something that, I'm a giver. I just love helping people. So like I give information out that definitely could be intellectual property. It could be things that are monetized, but because I want to see people win, I'm like, yes, yes, yes. But there was a point in the beginning where I was accepting contracts because I didn't know my value. And I didn't recognize the value add that I added to these organizations and to these young people that I was working with. And so being able to price and standing on my price and knowing that I am worth this price, and with the background, with the education, with the experience, that I don't have to lower my price just to get a contract. Just being able to notice, to recognize that has helped increase the bottom line to where within the first couple of years, I tripled what I was making. And so I'm really big on knowing your value and knowing your worth, but also looking at, if someone is willing to pay the price that you offer, then the value that it adds to their organization or to what they are doing is more meaningful and impactful. So if they say yes to your price, and you're looking at that price like, they really said yes to this, okay. It's more of like being confident and standing on it. We know that for me as a minority, and as a woman, I knew that people were undercutting my price and my bids and proposals when I was giving them, because I knew on the other side of that what other organizations were charging for similar work, and I knew the quality that I had, and I knew that I do excellent work. And so for me, it was more of like, that's not for me then. It's not in alignment with me, because what's for me will be offered to me, and I'll be able to walk through that door and accept those offers on the price that I feel good about. And so now the bottom line is I'm able to walk in confidently. I'm able to have my other consultants know that they are just as valuable and they are able to command a certain amount. And then it just increases the bottom line. But at the end of the day, we're changing lives. So it's not always about the bottom line for me. So if there's something that is offered to me and I'm looking at it and I'm like, I can't do it for that price, but this is what I'm able to offer you, I would rather do it for free and as a write-off versus lowering my value. And so that's something that I learned as an entrepreneur. Stand on your price, but you still need to give back, like Waverly said, to the community. So I'm always doing community give backs, giving out scholarships, back to school events, anything that aligns with things that I wish someone would have done when I was in that position. I'm going to do it no matter what. But then when it's time to add a price to it, then I'm going to add that price.
I love that. And I think that speaks a lot to what Alicia was saying, giving yourself permission or knowing your value. When you get to the point where you're like, you know what? Me and Summer use this word a lot. I'm dope. Like, yeah, so you're going to have to pay that and not feel bad about it, because I know that I'm going to give you excellent service, excellent product, and I'm standing in the fullness of who I am and my value. That is so, so important. Waverly?
piggybacking on what Angela said and what you just said, Tamika, giving excellent service, excellent value. We go get into a little muddy water a little bit. This tie right here, when I was polishing myself up and getting the knowledge of business, one thing that the first organization that really got me to identify my target demographic was Jumpstart. And that was a question that we wrestled with earlier on, because they said, well, who's your target demographic? And I'm a barber. Anybody with hair? I just want to cut everybody's hair. No, Waverly, no. And so they finally realized that once you narrow it down to your target demographic, that's when things will start picking up for you, because those are the people you market to. Okay, I learned that my target demographic is the entrepreneurs of the millennials and the Gen Zs, the professionals of them, because number one, they make enough money to get groomed on a regular basis. Number two, they're not going to complain when the price goes up, and the price is going to go up. Number three, these are the people that's go get a service at one of my businesses by me and one of my guys, or one of my team members, and then they go out to their car, they go take a selfie, they go tag the shop. That's free advertising. So I learned that. But also during that same time, my barbershops are in a strange place, because I'm a Black business owner, but my shops are very diverse, and that's on purpose. Probably about 50% of our clientele is Black, but the other 50% is, Caucasian and other ethnicities and lifestyles. But I noticed that once I was polishing myself up, I'm a study of history and barbering, and the old barbers used to wear ties back in the day. And so and Lamont, you probably don't remember this, but while I was going through the programming, that's when I started wearing ties. And I noticed that I was received better by my Caucasian counterparts. Again, we go get into some muddy water, because I know that I'm a large man. I know that I'm a dark-skinned man. I know that I'm bald-headed, and I have a full beard. So when I walk into a room, before me and a Caucasian or other ethnicity has had words, I'm already preconceived. But this tie, just this tie alone, I'm doing subliminal mind tricks with these people, because that makes them say, oh, he's okay. And they come right up to me. I think that, I enjoy wearing them, and you'll never see me in a professional setting without them, because this tie gets me in rooms that I would not have been invited to without it. Now, again, it's muddy waters, and it's a shame that I have to wear it, but I need to get in that room, because I got a bunch of barbers behind me. They ain't wearing no tie. So I need to get in that room to say, look, we good. We good. I got a whole squad behind me that of entrepreneurs that I'm training up and I'm influencing, but they not gonna wear a tie when you see them. I'm here to let you know, to be the liaison, the bridge, to let you know that the people that's coming behind me, they are good. So the tie alone, me wearing the tie, was a traumatic situation that that I felt like I had to do, and I continuously have to do. But programs like this, and then we have to have equity training in institutions and things of that nature to let the other people know that what we're going through as entrepreneurs. Because, and I tell my students all the time, for me to have the Caucasian clientele that I have to cut their hair 10 times better than their white barbers. I have to cut my Hispanic clients' hair 10 times better than their Hispanic barbers. Period, point blank, end of story. Now that's negotiable and debatable, but I've been doing this for some years. And again, I know for a fact that this tie has gotten me into rooms that if I would have had a t-shirt and some Jordans on, I wouldn't have been invited to.
Yes. And Waverly, that was a perfect example of lifting while you climb, and really being a bridge between what is white approved right? If we can be honest, what is white approved? And then the rest of the world out there, right? Who may not have that context, but definitely has a skill, definitely has to drive, motivation, wants it, may already have clients, may already have a business plan, but the look, right? The look. Sometimes that's a hurdle that some entrepreneurs don't want to jump over. Hey, I cut hair. Why do I have to wear a tie? Right? Waverly's going to tell you why it's important to him, and you're going to trust him because he's in your community. You see him. He cuts your hair. He cuts your children's hair. You talk about the traumas that you've experienced and you heal together. So if Waverly says wear a tie, nah, I put this tie on. You might like it, right? But you're being a bridge and creating better context for other groups to be able to understand one another. I really appreciate that example.
Yeah. And that's why representation is so important. Representation in every environment is just really, really critically important. And Waverly, I'm over here formulating a whole new webinar, and I think Summer is too, because I know her well. Like just that component of this panel discussion alone is a whole nother 4-hour webinar. How do we get here? How do we get out of this? And how do we educate people that are receiving and serving business owners of color in particular, right? In equity. When we talk about equity, equity means going out of your way to. Take all the clinical definition away, right? Equity means going out of your way to. Equity and equality are not the same thing. And a lot of organizations are operating in equality and think they're being equitable. But listen, let me get off that, because we could talk about that for a whole nother 4 hours. Let us know if you want us to customize a webinar that content, and we can come back and deliver that. Summer, did you have something else to say?
No, there's a lot of conversation in the chat. Just a lot of checking and hand clapping and high-fiving around some of your perspectives. And what this does for us is just, it shows our shared experiences. It shows our lived experiences and how this forum is necessary for us to share stories, but also resources and ideas. I see a lot of people like, hey, do it for free and write it off. I didn't think about that, right? Right? Because your bottom line is this right here all day. It's right here, but there's a creative way to hit it, right? And these amazing entrepreneurs are giving us some gems and just opening up, the world of propelling yourself out of trauma to success. So thank you for that. And I did want to know if there were any questions just in the room for the panel through the chat. If you'd like to speak out and speak up, let us know. Danielle, I know you're working that for us.
Can I say something real quick, Summer?
Absolutely.
I just wanted to say, this conversation is so needed. And in our partnerships with Jumpstart, I'm going to continue to advocate for this conversation, at minimum quarterly, because there's many entrepreneurs that this needs to reach. And people don't catch on, right, quickly. We need to continue, social media, right? Algorithms are set up. People are not even seeing our posts these days. So I want to continue advocating. I know there's folks, Lamont and others on Jumpstart's team that's on the call, that this conversation needs to be a top priority for our entrepreneurs of color in our communities to continue to happen and create safe spaces to share our stories, but also learn the techniques and the practices that Summer and Tamika has shared this early morning about, the bottom line of trauma and how that's affecting our businesses, but also affecting ourselves, our self and our function. So I wanted to say thank you for you two putting this on and, giving us an opportunity to share, but ultimately creating safe spaces for entrepreneurs of color.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much for that, Alicia. Waverly said something that we always strive for. I look for the light bulb moments. It's my favorite thing. It's why we love training, especially in person. I love to see people go, Because then I know that they had a light bulb moment. So to hear Waverly say, "Oh, I'm having a light bulb moment," that's like mission accomplished. We want you to shift your perspective. We want you to open your mind. We want you to think about some things you haven't thought about before. And if this conversation incited that for you, that's what we came here to do. And we'd love to continue the conversation, however that looks. I agree with you, Alicia. This is a topic that should be talked about often. And it should be talked about often because the more we share our experiences in time and space, the more open we'll be to sharing more. And the more we share, the more we can understand perceptions and perspectives and engage with each other as human beings and not that competitive business owner over there or that resource provider who didn't treat me well, right? The more that we have these conversations. So thank you so much for saying that. I know we have to transition into our break. I want to give another moment for anyone who might want to ask a question in the chat. I'm sure there are a lot of things swirling in your head, but we just want to make sure before we close out this dynamic, amazing panel, thank you so much to all of you again for being here, that you have time and opportunity to ask your question of any of the three of them.
Yes, you can raise your hand if you like. We can unmute you if you'd like to ask it directly. All right, no hands have been raised. I think you got them. Great insight.
Thank you, Sade. We appreciate that. Well, again, thank you to Waverly and Angela and Alicia for sharing your time, your treasure, your talent with us today. We're all better for the information that you shared. I know I'm leaving here better. We appreciate the time that you took out of your very busy entrepreneurial day to spend with us and to pour into us and adding so much value to this webinar. So from the bottom of our hearts, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much.
Awesome.
So we're going to transition into a break similar to our first break. We're just going to pinpoint a time to return for bio breaks and stretch your legs. And we're going to come back and round out this training with more information for you to take out into the world. So we're going to do what, 15, Tamika?
Yeah, let's do 15 minutes.
All right.
So that brings us to 11:18.
Mm-hmm.
11:18 will be ready to go and we will see you then. Anything we haven't adjusted. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the 4 R's. And usually, you know, when we dive deep into trauma, it's usually 2 days, 2 4-hour days. But, you know, thinking about business owners who don't have a lot of time, we wanted to make this more concise. But the 4 R's are something that we have to talk about. And it's as it relates to organizations that are supporting entrepreneurs and small businesses, but it's also as it relates to you as an entrepreneur or a business owner. So let's get into it. The first I is recognizes. We've been talking about that, right? The awareness. You recognize signs and symptoms of trauma in clients, families, staff, and others. If you don't know what trauma is, if you don't know how it can show up, if you don't know the different degrees of trauma, that's why we base this webinar in that information, because now that you're more aware, can you now recognize trauma in other people better? Not all the time. We're not all trauma practitioners. We get that. But has our compassion muscle been activated to now that we can recognize some behaviors as trauma and respond in compassion, rather than respond in a punitive way? Are we recognizing? And then next is realizes. I hope today you understand better the widespread impact of trauma and understand potential paths for recovery. One of the paths is this forum right here. During my time at Jumpstart, we have a group called Inclusion Champions, and I was honored to lead our trauma discussion. And I think we did it for maybe four different times or whatever. And by like the second or third time, more people were signing on. And they weren't just signing on, more people were talking. So we didn't have to come with a lot of content because this was a path to recovery, or what I like to say, a path to healing. And we all need healing in some way, shape, or form. So we realize the widespread impact of trauma and we respond accordingly, again, rather than react. And then resist. Are we actively seeking to resist re-traumatization? Understanding the damaging and devastating effects that trauma can have on us personally, right? And as a community or as a family, are we being very intentional in how we respond to one another? Are we allowing ourselves the time and space to recognize like, ooh, that wasn't for me, that wasn't personal. I think that's trauma showing up. Realize that somebody's in a moment and then resist the urge to villainize them or make them feel worse or re-traumatize them. And let me tell you something, triggers don't always come out in words. Let's be real here, we're human beings. Sometimes triggers come out in a physical way. It could be fighting, it could be grabbing a gun, it could be grabbing a knife because I'm re-traumatized, I'm triggered. Are we resisting that? And then respond. By fully integrating the knowledge that we've learned here today, we hope that you'll double down on some of this information. We hope that we'll be asked back, or your organization or business will have us to come in and talk to you even more. But are you responding by fully integrating the knowledge that you have about trauma into policies, procedures, and practices?
Thank you.
And that's especially important in organizations.
Mm-hmm.
When you're serving and supporting.
For you all to connect the lessons, if you go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, self-actualization, esteem, love, and belonging, all of those needs, those are individual needs, right? So organizations, and to piggyback off of what Tamika just said about going back to your policies and procedures, organizations and businesses going back to your policies and procedures and saying, what did I create out of trauma? How do I move out of trauma? And what basic need am I looking to achieve in my business practices, right? So I think that trauma-informed businesses create trauma-informed relationships. And for us to have trauma-informed relationships, to have relationships at all, we have to recognize one another as individuals who have basic needs. It's not mystified, it's basic.
Yeah,
we're making it a little bit deeper than it needs to be.
Yes, I can share an experience. As Summer we work with businesses, and even prior to the business, I probably worked with hundreds and hundreds of businesses. And one of my favorite things to do is to go into the business and just spend some time, just engaging, interacting, feeling the energies. Summer talked about energy. And I was in Albany, New York, maybe a few weeks ago, and there is this like soul food spot, Allie B's, very, very well known. And it's in a very, I hate to label any section bad, but you know, the narrative is this neighborhood is bad. This is where a lot of people will not start businesses. And she was very intentional about opening up a restaurant in this section of town. And she went on to say how a lot of her clientele are people that other businesses would turn away at the door. And she went on to tell me about how there were gang members who came to her almost every day for food. And as we were talking, some of those gang members came into the shop, into her restaurant. And the first thing they did was pull their pants up. I watched it happen. The first thing they did was pull their pants up. One had a hat on. He took his hat off and kind of put it over his hat. And he said, "Hey, Miss Allie. Hey, Miss Allie." And she said, "Hey, baby, I love you. How you doing?" She said, "I love you" to them about 5 different times. And as they left, all of them said, "Love you, love you." I bet you there aren't many other people in the world they say love you to. But because she recognized the trauma that was attached to the behavior that other people were criminalizing, and she decided to respond in compassion and show them a different way, not only does she have that consistent business, because she said they come in every day, but she's changing hearts and minds. When you interact and engage with people, again, whether you're an organization or a business, you're sitting in a space where you can actually change people's lives, even just with how you treat them. And that's real. I think some of our panelists touched on that today, some of the business owners, about paying it forward, right? And all of those things. Like, do we really understand and recognize the power of our words and the power of our responses versus our reactions, and how that can not only shift mindsets, but change the whole trajectory of someone's future just by how you're engaging and interacting with them. So when you're thinking about trauma, remember the 4 R's, and that's recognizing, realizing, resisting, and responding. I want to encourage you, I want to challenge you to respond in compassion, even when it's the most difficult thing for you to do in that moment, because it can shift the whole dynamics of a thing, a business relationship, a personal relationship, a romantic relationship. Getting it wrong can devastate a relationship. Isn't it worth us being aware that sometimes how people are showing up is not them at all, but their trauma manifesting, and I can nurture you in this moment rather than attack you? We want you to walk away with that. So now we wanted to try and do breakouts. We can't do breakouts on this platform. I'm just gonna say a thing out loud, and it's fine. But we want to talk about how to apply trauma-informed practice to our work and to our business. We want you all to, with the content that you've had and thinking about the business owners and what they shared, whether you are an organization that serves and supports small business owners, or you are an aspiring or seasoned business owner yourself, we want to give you some time and space to identify a way that your trauma has either affected your engagement with marginalized small business owners, if you're an organization, or identify one way your trauma has affected your business decisions. Because now that you're more aware, now that you're recognizing some things, remember Waverly said, I didn't even think about how trauma birthed my business. Like, you're bringing something, it has something new been birthed in you that you can speak to. And then we want to share out together. We want this to be an interactive time. So whether you would like to engage via chat, or if you want to raise your hand and have your mic unmuted so that you can speak with us, we want to give you time and opportunity to do that. So let's say that we'll give everyone, Summer, do you think 5 minutes is good?
Yeah.
Okay, let's give 5 minutes. We're going to keep the questions up on the screen, but we want to hear back from you. This is really supposed to be an interactive discussion or webinar today. So now that you know what you know, how are you going to respond to these questions?
And I'm going to participate too.
I'm going to participate too. Okay, everyone, as you're continuing to think about your answer, I just want to remind you there are actually 3 ways for you to engage or interact. You can put it in the chat and we'll respond. The Q&A module is also open, so if you don't want other participants to see it's you responding, and it would just be visible to myself and Summer and the team in the background, then you can use the Q&A, which should be at the top of your screen. It might be at the bottom, depending on your configuration, but it says Q&A. Or you can also raise your hand and someone in the background will unmute your mic if you prefer just to state your question or, I'm sorry, your answer out loud. So we're going to give it another couple of minutes and then we're going to get started. I see Summer started us off. If you all want to take a look at the chat and see what she wrote too, and so that we can begin this interactive section of our engagement today.
Thanks, Chanel. Okay. I don't see any hands raised, and I may have been the only person who responded in the chat. Oh, I do see a hand raised. Danielle.
Hey, Summer,
See,
do you have your setting on everyone or just on?
I did have it on.
Okay.
Yeah, but I moved it to everyone.
Okay, good. You should see I know I wrote mine in the chat. So you
Oh,
should
you did? Okay. Yeah, maybe it's not populating for me. Oh, I see. So then why don't you share out, Lamont? You're on the mic.
Oh, no.
No?
Oh, okay, I'll go ahead and jump
Go
in.
for it.
I'll make it straightforward. I think I believe what I said was that trauma really forced me into my career. So my initial career, a lot of people know this, was banking. And I was fortunate enough growing up where my dad was a prominent minister in Washington, D.C. area. He actually went into the bank. So I went into the bank with him growing up. So we didn't have that particular trauma. But what I recognized is how many other people, as we said earlier, didn't go to the bank or had problems with engaging with the bank. So I actually got into banking in part because it was a way to help other people. And when I got in there, what I was thinking I was going to do and what I ended up doing literally was helping people understand what a bank was all about, how to deal with a bank, how to apply for a loan. You talked about that, Tamika, earlier, how to set up an account, just all the things that they needed somebody who looked like them, who related to them culturally, related to them from a race standpoint, language standpoint, could explain. And that literally propelled me into development banking, which was basically the banking that you did in communities that are low income and needed a bank. And I started these, was president of 4 banks that did that kind of work. So it led me my whole career, and eventually led me to Jumpstart to do the same thing, helping entrepreneurs understand how to get in business and what they need to do. So trauma did that because of what I saw in the trauma, and the trauma that I had initially, by the way, with my, I think you know this story, Tamika, my peach suit. When I got into my internship program at Bank of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia, walking in under their internship program, it was the first, one of the few blacks that were going to go through this program. And I walked into that bank with a peach suit, like I'm ready. I'll tell you the rest about if somebody doesn't know the story, I'll talk about the trauma of all that later, but that also helped. That also helped.
Thanks for sharing, Lamont.
Wait, what's the problem? What's the problem? I got my clean suit on. What's the problem?
I had Sunday best with my flowered tie too. Now, don't I had that flowered tie on.
Lamont, yeah. I see that 2 people have raised their hands. Are we able to go in and unmute them?
Yep, we're going to start with Danielle.
Okay, great.
Okay, so you guys can hear me okay?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. I just really was sitting here thinking and it was funny about Summer's response because I was thinking the same thing, that it paralyzes me. I created a business and launched it, but have not taken any clients yet out of fear of so many things due to trauma. And like Summer, I'm in therapy, trying to find the root. I think it's really important when we are doing trauma work to have a very good therapist or someone you can work with to find the root and then to pluck it, because that trauma will find other ways of coming up, like a weed. It will come up in other ways in other parts of your life. And to really find the root and pluck it and then put a healthy coping skill or a healthy habit in its place. So trauma work, it's definitely something, but I'm looking forward to, finding my roots and moving fearlessly in my new business. But that's what came up for me.
Thanks for sharing, Danielle.
Yeah, I appreciate that transparency. And you, full transparency, Danielle is also my first cousin. She is the baby brat of the family. Yes, I said it out loud. But she knows that I'm one of her biggest cheerleaders, but I also know the fullness of her story. And so another thing that I want to say, as much as we should strive to operate in our purpose, to also be kind to yourself, to also know when to hold them, when to fold them. What's that song, right?
That's
Sometimes, the season of isolation that's been touched on a few times today is a necessary component to your healing and the manifestation of your purpose. Don't ever try and to dismiss that part of your journey, that isolation part, because sometimes we are required to sit with ourselves before we can be present for anyone else. So I want to offer that to all of you. And I say it to Danny all the time, be kind to yourself. Because Danny is a powerful, dynamic person. I think one of the things she knows is once she hits go, it's going to be go. It's going to be quick success and abundance. And she wants to make sure that she's prepared for that. And we all should do that as well. We have a couple more hands raised, Summer.
Yeah, I see Sharday. I'm going to allow Sharday to speak up.
Hello, everyone. I really enjoyed this. There are so many presentation points that I came out with, but my trauma experience can really be entitled The Well-Educated Negro, Trauma of the Middle Class Family. And I think so many times when you're in that space of being educated, being middle class, there's trauma that comes into it that the weight of the Black community is on you. So therefore, if you don't have the answer or you don't know how to do something, you're not allowed to ask the question because your community looks to you for the answer and the outside community looks to you as the example. So how can I learn if I don't know something, because on two parts, feeling like you're letting people down. You're letting down your community, and you're also letting down those who now look at you as the example. And so that trauma experience has hindered me in asking for help, or if I ask for help, but the response is not immediate or in the way in which I can receive it, then I shut down and I'm just like, I'll figure it out. Because if I continue to ask, I have to continue to admit that there is something that I don't know or something that I can't get. And I refuse to allow anyone to think as if I am not as good as I have grown up saying that I needed to be. There's a lot of layers there, but that's the general concept of being okay to ask for help, and recognizing that the weight of, because you are well educated, because you know how to present yourself well, that you do not owe it to your community to always know everything, and you do not owe anything to the majority community by being the go-to. So lots in there, but that's my trauma response.
Wow. Pulling out a whole nother webinar.
I know.
we got Summer, we got a lot of writing to do. And let's touch on the point that, especially for Black and Brown business owners, overwhelmingly, we are solopreneurs, at least at the onset of our careers, right? We're starting out alone. And so to your point, just the weight of the heaviness of, you have to get it right. It's one thing when you work for an organization, if something goes wrong, you're like, well, my boss didn't do what they were supposed to do, or my colleague didn't show up or whatever. But when it's you and only you, and something doesn't go the way it's planned, there's nobody to look on. Just like when the revenue's not coming in, there's nobody to lean on. And that's real. That's trauma.
Yeah.
And that's ongoing trauma. How do we navigate through that? How do we work with that? How do we shift our mindset to know that my purpose is not to be everything for all people, even if it's just my people? That's not your purpose on earth. But then again, especially as women, and I'll say universally as women, that's why it's so important to share our stories. We do such a great job of buttoning things up and making everything look awesome and perfect and impeccable. And people don't know the holy hell that we had to go through to get to that point. But the more that we are authentic and transparent in our stories, I will tell you every day, there are some days I don't want to adult, okay? And I spend my life pouring into other people, but I'm transparent about that, because to what Alicia said earlier, that's giving other people permission to be kind to yourself, to know that the people that you're admiring don't always have it all together. I don't know one person on the planet that has everything all together. And so to have that expectation on ourselves, we are traumatizing ourselves in that space. So I also want to encourage all of you to be authentic in your sharing, because that produces healing.
Yeah, and I want to commend Sade. Did I say that right, Sade?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. I want to commend you, Sade, for really synthesizing the complexities of, the expectations of the outside world on you, just based on your economic status, your family's status, and that pressure to be a mouthpiece for an entire community. That is pressure. You are an individual who has your own context and your own groups and experiences. And I totally can understand, if I could share really quick, my story is, I come from very humble beginnings, but my father is a famous guitar player. He's a musician, and he hit the big time right before I was born. So our family dynamic changed, and I went from poverty to middle class, almost rich for a while. And so there was so much pressure on me to be something, right? To move in a certain way. But the outside world didn't understand the traumas that I had experienced and how I can't perform all day, right? And then I have a business, fast forward to being an entrepreneur, having business ideas and carrying that trauma and the weight of that trauma and feeling like, perfectionism makes you isolate. Perfectionism doesn't allow you to delegate. Not thinking you're enough says don't ask for help, because then they'll know you're not enough, right? All of those things culminate into trauma responses. And I just really appreciate how you just very simply stated how that affected you. And I'm sure that other entrepreneurs on the call can relate to that. So thank you so much for sharing that. And we have Famita.
Hello.
Did I say that properly?
Yes, you did.
Hi, Famita.
Hello. Thank you so much for this. So, as I've been thinking about it, just so many layers. I don't think I can discuss all of them, but I'm an immigrant, so I didn't grow up here. I grew up in India, and I moved here for education. So as I'm thinking about some of the things that have happened, like, so growing up, I was, the A student in school, and so did really well in school. But then I also realized that I didn't have a lot of friends because I did really well, or maybe that was my perception of it, right? Also noted some resentment amongst family because, I did very well. And so that, as I grew up, I somehow started making that connection. And I'm like, well, if I need to have friends and support around, then maybe I cannot be successful, because if I am, then I won't have that support or family or friends, right? Because as it is, people always tell me that they're very intimidated by me. Doesn't matter how hard I try to make people comfortable. So there was that one layer of it. And then being an immigrant in this country, having to go through endless years of constantly being on a visa and being very restricted in what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do, really kind of forces you to keep playing small because of the system. Because you're like, oh, you cannot do this because you're on this visa and you're allowed to only do this. And so the playing small kind of just continued going on, starting from that young experience and then moving here, and you move to a different country for opportunities, but somehow the system reinforces that, hey, you are here, you are not a citizen, so you don't have the right to do this, that, or the other. And this is your little box. And if you don't play well in this little box, then we're just going to ship you back out.
Okay.
And so how that has manifested is I play small. I play small. Criticism hits me really hard because I take everything very, very personally, considering that, oh yeah, I did something wrong again. Oh, I offended someone again, so on and so forth.
Absolutely. Famita, your story, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Playing small, not using your voice for so many reasons, right? But the reasons that you outlined about being smart. I used to be a principal, assistant principal at an elementary and middle school in Philadelphia. And my kids were smart. That's what I say all of them. They're all intelligent, all of them. But because of some traumas, bullying, poverty, food insecurity, housing insecurity, clothing insecurity, a lot of my students played small. A lot of my immigrant students played small and didn't offer their wealth of experiences to, their new friends in class, right? Because they didn't want to be ostracized. They didn't want to be talked about. And look at how that trauma travels with you to adulthood, and renders the same result in the business space as a grown-up. I'm just going to play small. I know the answer. I know how we can fix this little problem we have here at my company, but I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to be looked at as trying to be better than or things like that. So to Tamika's point earlier, and I'm not trying to diagnose anything, but I am pulling out the example that, you know, walking in your gifts and your talents is empowering. But also, you know, having that support around you that encourages you to use your voice, and to surround yourself with the like minds, the other entrepreneurs that may have similar experiences, but have navigated, may have more experience and more tenure in your industry, and who can be just support, emotional, business supports, but just folks that just know your story, right? Context is everything. Knowing from the beginning to the end is how you win, right? Somebody, a mentor for you, Famita, would be so much more effective knowing what we just found out in like 2 minutes.
Mhm.
You telling me that makes me understand, oh, see, what you think, right? If you were in a classroom with me, what do you think? Because I know your experience. And what Tamika and I are saying and trying to put across to everyone on this webinar is that our communication has been stifled by trauma. Our ability to move to the next level has been stifled by the traumas that we're living in, and we're not sharing authentically, to Tamika's point. Because when we share authentically, we go, yes, you too. And those are going to be people that look like you and people that don't, which should give you a sense of comfort and should give you at least put a little bit of battery in your pack and say, okay, move forward. Right. So I hope that what you've experienced on this training has given you some fuel, some tools, some resources, but more importantly, the idea that you're not alone and thinking like that, because we think like that sometimes. Right, Tamika?
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that stood out for me the most, Famita, from your story is that you came to this country for a sense of freedom only to be put in a box.
Yes.
And how that is showing up and how you show up. You said it, how you walk into the room, whether or not you speak. And so I want to double down on what Summer said, there was a time where I was almost mute. Can you believe that? People who know me now are like, girl, you lying. But there was a time where I almost wouldn't say anything to anyone. And there was a time where I was so insecure in being a business owner. It took somebody in my tribe or my village to say, stop doing grant writing for free. Do you know you have a whole business? Do you know that the words that you write bring in hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars for organizations to help our communities? And it took for me to say, if I continue to stifle my talents and my gifts, that's not only having a negative effect on me, but what about all the people I should be in front of helping and ushering them to healing with my talents and my gifts? Sometimes for those of us that love to serve and lead people, we have to shift our mindset. Like I say all the time, I got emboldened when I had children. Because now me using my voice isn't just about what's best for me. I'm thinking about my son. You don't get to say no to my son, right? And so for some of us, whether we have children or not, when we align our thoughts with whether or not we're able to help people, which is a passion for us, it will spark something inside of us. And I'm not saying that it's going to be comfortable, because I still speak in front of hundreds, sometimes thousands of people, and I still get nervous. But then I think about what I'm about to pour out, what I'm about to do to position someone to live an empowered life. And it gives me this spark that I haven't had before. Summer and I also, we have a training called Imposter Syndrome. And Famita, we're going to make sure that we get your information, because I would love for you to come to that training, because I really feel like you would leave from that training just like, I could do anything. I'm about to use the whole voice every day, all the time, and feel supported to do so. So we'll make sure that we share that with you. But thank you so much for being so transparent with your story.
Absolutely. Thanks, Famita. There's also some comments in the chat too, Tamika, that I'm looking at.
Okay.
I see Megan She says, I work for an organization that services entrepreneurs. I try to approach my entrepreneurs from a place of support and information sharing. That's the best place
That
to
is.
start. Encouragement, and let me give you some info and support. That's what we all want, no matter what walk of life we're in. So back to Maslow's, right? We all want that. We all want belonging and love. And I know it sounds like real frilly and like, this is not trauma content, belonging and love. What are you talking about? No, that is an inherent need for all of us, right? So as organizations, being trauma informed means you show up in that way. So I commend you for showing up in that way, right? Because that allows you to be more effective in your work and to help more people, and so on, right? Just like, lifting as we climb.
And to pull back a little bit on that, Megan, I'm going to challenge you even a little further. Are you really intentional about the support that you're offering? Has it been guided by the information that the person that you're serving or supporting shared with you? I'm going to share a story. Again, we've worked with hundreds of businesses, and I referred someone to an entrepreneurial support organization, much like Jumpstart, but it wasn't Jumpstart, in another state. And it was an organization that I had a really good rapport with. And she came back so mad and so upset and so hurt, because she came in and she was a Black woman. And she said, they immediately told me I needed a business plan. They immediately told me that I needed to take my vision from my head to a piece of paper. And their intention was to like, hey, let's get this together. But she was a seasoned business owner who was coming in to get resources for an attorney. So sometimes when we are offering support without context or without the knowledge of what people really need, unintentionally, we can offend them. So I love that your baseline is to offer support and to be open. And I want to challenge you a step further to make sure that the support you're offering is grounded in the needs of that individual based on what they told you they need, and not what we as people universally can also assume that people need. And that goes back to the re-traumatization. So let's make sure that we're basing what we're doing and how we're doing it in the needs of the people we're serving and supporting.
Absolutely.
I think we have some more in
Yep.
the chat. Yes, let's
Courtney.
see.
Courtney said, I grew up as the only Black family in our town. My parents were HBCU grads and modeled inclusiveness very well, but did not share their own racial struggles and realities. I am working my first FTE role in almost 20 years, coming from entrepreneurship professionally. Let me see, hold on, I'm scrolling down. Hold on, here we go. Professionally, when I meet individuals, I question their sincerity of requesting my involvement in their projects. I often feel like I'm being targeted as the token friend once again. That's interesting.
And it's so real.
It is. The way you articulated it, very simply put, does it take us back to love and belonging again? I think it does. And authentic storytelling, right? Tamika said, when we first started, the truth shall set you free, or the truth, whatever you said, tell the truth. Because the truth will set you free. It may hurt, but having your parents share those stories with you could have given you more context, right? And how to move forward. However, it looks like you're a wealth of information because of your trauma experiences. We have to understand that trauma, although it's not great, it breeds opportunity at times. It breeds the opportunity for us to level set, because the truth is we all have experienced some sort of trauma. And if we can intersect with that empathy muscle, we can begin to share our stories in a safe space and begin to heal. So I totally can understand, kind of that lack of information as you move through life.
And it's interesting you bring that up because I have to have this difficult conversation this week, Courtney. So maybe we can talk together. But I want to encourage you to name the impact. We talked about that in the very beginning, right? We're going to challenge ourselves too. And naming the impact is letting them know exactly how you feel. I have to have that conversation this week. I got brought into a conversation that has nothing to do with my line of work, my line of business, but it is, let's say, people are trying to create a business relationship with a very well-known Black woman entrepreneur. None of them look like her. And so they're pulling from wherever they can to have somebody that looks like her sit in the room. Now, representation matters, but I don't know nothing about what they're going to be talking about in that line of business. And so that sparked from me, and I don't believe that was their intention. Let's say that. I don't believe that was their intention, but it sparked for me some trauma triggers of, I too grew up in a middle class neighborhood where a lot of times I felt like I was only called on to be the token to say that they had diversity. And that's coming up for me again. And I don't want it to affect how I feel about the organization I work for or the quality of my work. So I know I'm going to have a difficult conversation. I'm going to have to name the impact. And I'm going to lead with, I don't believe this was your intention. However, and it's so important that we have those difficult conversations because sometimes people don't know what they don't know. And we're mad at them and they ain't got no clue about why we're mad or how we got there. But thank you so much for sharing that. Lamont says he believes that a lot of Black leaders become leaders because of trauma. I agree. I really, really agree with that. One of the reasons why that whole 14 generations things really sits with me is in my DNA, on my father's family, my great grandfather was Jewish. My other great grandfathers and grandmothers were Native American. And then also I have African in my family. I know that there are some people in my family who were actual slaves. And so when I think about how I'm a justice-minded individual, right? Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. It's one of my mantras. Like Summer talks about being She-Hulk. I don't know if I'm like She-Justice. I don't know, we'll make up a name. But like, I want there to be justice everywhere. But when I think about the trauma that rests in my DNA from people, indigenous people, slaves, Jewish people. I had family members that I found out were in concentration camps and died there. That's all living right here in me. And it absolutely has an effect on how I view the world. I want everything to be just. And that's unreasonable sometimes, right? Everything can't be just all the time. But I have that awareness now. Right. So I think my being pushed into leadership, because I'm the girl that wants to be in the back. I want to help to make all the things happen. I want to position people. I love to see people shine, but very often I'm pushed to the front. And I believe that's because of the passion behind my trauma. Some lived and some I didn't even experience on my own. And that's true for so many of us. That's a great point, Lamont. Thank you for that. Do we have any other questions, comments? This is a great conversation. I love this part of our trainings, to hear back from you all and to have the time and opportunity to engage. Again, you can use the chat or the Q&A, or you can raise your hand and have your mic unmuted, but do we have any more input that we can share together today? Sharday has raised her hand. Yes, give her the mic. Somebody get Sharday the mic.
We got you, Sharday.
Just to piggyback on what was said earlier too in regards to pricing, I think pricing definitely plays a key factor in entrepreneurship and the trauma of figuring out, how much do I cost and sticking to that. So I think any support in that, for me personally, one of my trauma responses have been, I literally have something on my desk now, opportunity to work with my expertise is within the Black organization, helping them to get grant funding and programmatic development, right? As I decided as of May 28th to do entrepreneurship full time, I've shifted a little bit and kind of widened the scope in order to meet bottom line, because now it's not just, a passion and a hobby that brought in extra income. It's like, oh, you have a whole business. And so what I will say is that part of my trauma response that I'm realizing is saying, well, maybe I need to work with others and not just the Black community, based off of how my passion started, because we're underfunded and oftentimes under-resourced. And so I say that to say is I literally have an opportunity sitting on my desk now where the white organization has literally cut my pricing in half, holding out on signing the contract, but calling me. I've met with them like 3-4 times. They have all these questions. And in my mind, I find that I am okay with this because it's like, maybe I need them in order to prove that I am more than. And I realize that's a trauma response. When that's not the case. If it was anybody else, I'd be like, you know what, it's been a pleasure. God bless you. And good luck on finding another grant writer. But in my mind, it's like, well, this will expand my portfolio. It's, it's a white organization and da 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 da. And so I just, in short, want to say I appreciate this because I will be sending an email and recognizing that no, you do not need the majority or the cookie cutter, what it looks like on the outside to co-sign on your greatness, especially when other people already have. And I'm actually playing into the systemic barriers of not recognizing that the Black community has provided me value and thinking that I need to go outside of that. Granted, if the opportunity arises, by all means, I'm going to take it, but I'm not going to diminish my role and the significance of what I offer just to be able to say that I'm now working with this level of an organization when this is how they are acting in the beginning parts of it. Mm-hmm. So I think sometimes we struggle with that and we get real tied up in names, status, and all of these things, and we actually are bringing ourselves down because of it, rather than sticking to our bottom line, and the price is the price.
Yes. And don't be surprised if they email you back and say, okay, we'll pay it. Because sometimes they're just gauging your value of yourself. They want to know what they can get away with. And so, there are some universal laws that are true regardless of your religious affiliation. And that is what you give energy to is what becomes the thing. So if you're giving energy to, I need them, well, maybe I have to attach my name to their name so I can be great. Sis, you're already great. Operate in that greatness. I promise you, me and Summer went through this. And we were like, yeah, no, we're not changing our price because we're awesome at what we do. And what we're going to be able to deliver for them is going to position them to be very profitable. Mm-hmm. And they came back and paid us everything we said. So I'm going to encourage you to send the email in love and with great intentions and know your worth. And regardless of how they respond, continue to operate in that worth.
Yeah. Absolutely. And then also just demystifying the process of selling yourself, right? Because I think a lot of times we talk about white approval and white gaze and, just the status quo, right? Just like where does the corporate culture come from? It doesn't come from us, right? It's not our context. But at the end of the day, a sale is a sale is a sale. So people who are looking to sign contracts are looking to get the best deal. So don't look at it as I'm a Black business owner and I'm trying to get a contract with this white business. It's just like, we're two businesses doing business. You're going to try me. I'm going to say, nope, I'm worth this much. And you're going to say yes or no. The end.
The end.
We put too much context around some things, right? Some just basic business principles. Do you know how to sell? Do you trust yourself? Do you think you're worth it? Yeah. How much is it? 5,000? They want it for 3. I'm sorry, it's 5. All right. Take care. Have a great one. And it gets easier and it gets so simple. It's like, who pays the price gets the service. I'm worth it. And I'm going to go above and beyond because that's inherently in Tamika and I know that, like, we say no a lot, and we take on projects that align with our passion and align with, what we want to give back to the world. So if it gets hard, that's okay. We're going to dig in harder. If it gets fun, we're going to have fun with it, right? Because we're connected to it. So if you're saying in your mind as a business owner, I'm not really connected to this work anyway, so it's going to be this much, you have every right. And if somebody doesn't pay it, then you just move on to the next person.
Mhm. And Lamont said, Ali the greatest, he believed in himself and told you that. Yes, he did. Every minute, I am the greatest, I am the prettiest. My dad used to do that all the time. My dad used to say, baby, I can't wait till tomorrow. Why, daddy? Because I get better looking every day. He just believed in himself, and then it poured into me. So yeah, sometimes even when we're not feeling it, like, just get in the mirror and just like talk to yourself. I am worthy, I am valuable, I am a gift. Sometimes we have to say that to ourselves all the time. I know Chanel had something to say as well. She said one thing that stuck with me for the last couple of years is not asking what's wrong with you, but what happened to you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad you remember that, Chanel, from our Inclusion Champions days. There is a mental shift in asking this question and helping to relate to people. It absolutely is. And I shared that story of working with the Job Corps program. And people used to talk about my kids so bad. They're the worst of the worst. This is their last, blah, 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 blah. And I used to have such great success with them, even prior to my trauma training. But I noticed how much more success I had when they came in, maybe on 1,000. And you're like, what is wrong with them today? But instead of saying, what's wrong with you? It was, what happened to you? Because it, first of all, acknowledges that I know that this isn't just you. I'm not villainizing you. I'm not criminalizing you. And then I'm giving you time and space to share with me. Because that question in and of itself is what happened to you tells you that I care about you. I care enough to stop right now and hear from you so that we can level set this conversation and be effective. Mm-hmm. So yes, in trauma, that is so important. Instead of what's wrong with you, because listen, people have bad days, they come in with attitudes. Yesterday we were at lunch, today you're not talking to me, but you don't know what happened in between lunch yesterday and this morning. And it's very easy for us to personalize those things. But I encourage you, and Chanel, thank you for bringing this up. What happened? Rather than what's wrong with you? That's very defensive. I'm instantly going to be defensive if you say it to me like that.
Can I piggyback off of that really quick, Mika?
Yes.
Okay. I also just want to remind, when you see someone being triggered and things like that, that it's not about you in the moment, and that to take yourself out of the equation in that moment. So when you see someone riled up and upset and that's not their authentic self, instead of, oh, why are you attacking me? Why are you coming at me? Realize in that moment, I'm going to take myself out of this equation and see what I can do to support this person. It brings you down, it calms you down, it removes your defenses, and realize that there's a traumatic situation going on in front of you. So I think it's also important to know it's not about me in this moment, it's about you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's call a thing. That's hard. It's not an easy thing to do, right? This is a journey, not a destination. We're going to be always practicing this. That is a hard thing to do, but it's so critically important to get it. And thank you for sharing that, Danny.
Yes. Yeah, the more we do it, the better we get at it.
Yeah. Jody, I love this. She said, one of the most important things I ask entrepreneurs, are you paying yourself? This is good. Ooh. You are in business to support yourself, not for you to support your business. You have to know your worth. You would have to hire 2 to 3 people to replace what you do. Listen, Jody's telling my story. I started Kabod in 2015. By the grace of God, brought Summer on in 2020. Did not pay myself until 2021. And I didn't have to do that. I should have been paying myself. Yes, you want to give back to your business, but that's so true. Because that can affect your mindset too. When you're working so hard and other people are happy and you still broke, Or you still have never rewarded yourself? I love that, Jody. Are you paying yourself? That is good.
Love it.
Do we have any others before we transition from this conversation? This has been great. Thank you so much. This is what fills our tank, are these conversations, because we get a lot of light bulb moments out of these conversations, and we love to hear people engaging and interacting based on some of the information that you learned today. And then just also, we love hearing your personal stories that add so much value to the content. So thank you so much for all of you who have shared. I'm going to give you another moment. If you have anything else you'd like to share on the mic, off the mic, in the chat, in the Q&A, now is your time to do so. Going once. Going twice. Oh, Megan, I do want to say I saw your comment, and I agree 1000%. And I'm so grateful to know that there are people like you in this space, that warm referral or that warm transfer is so important. Entrepreneurs hate to be bounced around. It's so discouraging, especially when you're not getting positive outcomes from that bouncing around. So I'm just so encouraged and inspired to know that there are people like you in this space doing the work that you do. So thank you so much for sharing that. All right, if we don't have any other input, and again, we're still here for a little while longer. If something does come up, please feel free to put it in the chat or the Q&A. But one of the things that's really important to us when we're doing this work is that we don't just end it, right? We talked about some really heavy things here, and whether or not you participated or shared, or whether or not you accessed Danielle as part of your support in real time today, we don't want you to walk away from today heavy. There's been a lot of inspiring content, a lot of inspiring discussion, but we know and acknowledge that some of the content today may be heavy for you, or you may have a delayed response to some of the things that we talked about today. So one of the things that Danny does that we love is she grounds us before we move away from one another. She grounds us. And so we're going to have Danny come to the mic. I'm going to stop the share right now for a moment and have her do a grounding exercise with us. Danny?
Thank you, Mika. I just want to once again just say that I'm in awe of everything today. Every presentation I'm able to do with Summer and Tamika, I get something else new out of it. And the panelists were on point. The sharing was on point. I feel full. So I want to just thank everyone that shared. So I want to talk about grounding. With all the trauma conversations, I honestly feel it's important to walk away with tools to deal with trauma in our lives, as well as helping and supporting people around us. One of the grounding, so with trauma, one thing that happens is we get caught in the past. We get caught in overthinking, we get caught in just reacting and not feeling safe. One thing about trauma responses is reminding ourselves, reminding the person that we're with that you're safe. Also to tap into your 5 senses. Another way to kind of shut your mind off from that hamster in a wheel moment is to tap into your 5 senses to bring you back to the now, which is smells, what you see, what you feel, what you taste. So whenever you're in a situation, you find yourself kind of stuck in a thought of something traumatic, try to focus on your 5 senses. And on a low scale, for example, the exercise I'm going to show you all is called safe space. I like to create a safe space in my mind. this safe space I can travel to. I use it a lot. I use it with my kiddos at Johns Hopkins. I use it in my everyday living. I don't know about anyone else. This is a small thing, but whenever you go to the doctors and you have to get your weight checked and your blood pressure checked, I have a mini panic attack. And then my blood pressure is always high. So what I do is, as they're strapping me up, I go to my safe space in my mind and I do my breathing exercises. And a lot of times my pressure is not bad. So you can use it anywhere. You can use it and people don't even have to know. You can stand up, sit down, take 5 seconds, take 30 minutes, whatever you choose, but it brings you back to your now and shuts off that part of your brain that has you cycling whatever traumatic experience you're struggling with at the time. And it also calms down any physical reactions going on with your body. So my safe space is the beach. So the grounding exercise I'm going to do is walking everyone through my safe space. But once again, I encourage everyone to create their own. Some of the other safe spaces I've heard from some of my kiddos is that they're up in a cloud and it's quiet and silent and they're there by themselves floating. Some say that they have a bedroom with all these amazing things inside and no windows and doors because they don't want anyone to be able to come in. So whatever your safe space is, take time and create it. Tap into your 5 senses when you create it and know that it's yours and yours alone for you to use anytime you need it. To ground yourself when feeling triggered. Because honestly, sometimes we can't control when we're walking into a triggering situation. We can go to a family event and your ex-husband or wife could be there and you know they're going to trigger you, right? So having these tools, setting intentions when you go into situations that you could possibly be triggered, and using these coping skills to give you the support and the love that you need during these situations, because we can't always control what we're walking into. So for the moment, I am going to ask for everyone to sit in their chair, ground your feet on the floor. We are going to make sure our backs are straight. And I'm going to take you through breathing exercises, relaxing your body, and then we're going to travel to my safe space. Okay, we're going to take a deep breath in your nose and hold it. And slowly blow out. Take another deep breath in your nose and hold it. And slowly blow out. One more. We're going to take another deep breath in our nose and hold it. And slowly blow out. Your feet and ankles are completely relaxed. Your calves and your knees are completely and deeply relaxed. Your thighs and hips are completely and deeply relaxed. Take a deep breath in your nose and hold it. Slowly blow out. Your spine is completely and deeply relaxed. Your abdomen is completely and deeply relaxed. Your chest is completely and deeply relaxed. Your shoulders are completely and deeply relaxed. Take a deep breath in your nose and hold it. Slowly blow out. Your arms are completely and deeply relaxed. Your hands are completely and deeply relaxed. Your fingers are completely and deeply relaxed. Your throat is completely and deeply relaxed. Your jaw is completely and deeply relaxed. All the muscles in your face are completely and deeply relaxed. You are completely and deeply relaxed. Take a deep breath in your nose and hold it. Slowly blow out. Deep breath in your nose and hold it. Slowly blow out. You are looking up at the sky and you feel the sun rays beaming on your face. You see beautiful rays of sunshine shining down on you. You feel the warmth of the sun rays on your skin. You look straight ahead and you see a beautiful crystal blue ocean before you. You are on a beach all your own. The sand under your feet are powder white blue. You wiggle your toes in the sand and you can feel the grain of sand between your toes. The sand is warm to your touch, not too hot. You look to your right and you see an umbrella and a chair waiting for you. You walk over and hear your footsteps in the sand. You also hear seagulls squawking in a warm, smooth, gentle breeze along your skin. You hear the wind whistling in your ear, and it is pleasant. You go to your chair and sit down, and you take in all that's around you. The clear blue sky, the beautiful white clouds, the sounds and waves of the ocean. Take a deep breath in your nose and hold it, and slowly blow out. To your left, you see there's a cooler with a water bottle inside. You reach in and grab it. You can feel the cold condensation of the bottle in your hands. You twist off the cap and you take a sip. You can feel the cold water going down your throat. It is refreshing. You put the cap back on the bottle and slide it back into the cooler. You decide to stand up and stretch and walk over to the ocean. As you walk closer to the shore, your feet are chilled by the cool ocean water sand. You see your footprints in the sand, and you keep walking further. You slowly step into the water, and you can see your toes through the clear blue ocean water. You wiggle your toes, and it disappears under the sand. It makes you smile. Take a step out, and you walk further into the water. The water is now up to your knees. You begin to splash, begin to kick, you begin to laugh. You spin around, arms open to the sun. You are happy. You are at peace. You are safe. I'm going to slowly bring you out. We're going to take a deep breath in our nose and hold it. And slowly blow out. Deep breath in your nose and hold it. Slowly blow out. Last time, deep breath in your nose and hold it. Slowly blow out. When you are ready, come back to the room. All righty. So this is an exercise, once again, that you can definitely do if you feel like you're being triggered or you're walking into a challenging situation. If you want to do something quick and you feel yourself being triggered, also point out 5 things in the room you see. I see a chair. I see a gray lamp. I see a blanket. Start calling things that you see in the room. Then focus on your smells. I smell apple pie. I smell the new candle that I just bought. Focus on what you hear. I hear the refrigerator going. I hear my kids in their room. Tapping into your 5 senses helps to pull you out of being triggered. Does anyone have any questions?
I don't have a question, but I just want to say she gets me every time with this exercise. I never walk away without crying. The beach happens to be my happy place too, but it's such a beautiful thing to actually be able to put yourself somewhere else.
Darday said, can you fit in my pocket?
That's her question. That's what she said.
But I can give you the tools so you could do it without me. How about that? We can work it out. Sounds good.
Thank you, Danny.
Thank you.
No problem.
I feel great. So, we are coming to a close with our training today. We are so thankful to Jumpstart, Chanel, Lamont, our panelists, each other, our engagement, our contributions. This is a time and space that we spent together safely. We poured into one another. It wasn't just Tamika and I and Danielle pouring into you. We poured into one another. And we all will walk away from this with new perspective and new ideas on how to move away from our traumas to healing. And it is a process, like Tamika said, sounds great, but it's not easy. Which is why, to Alicia's point, this is something we should do as much as we can in order to feel better, right? And to do better business and to be more supportive organizations and businesses to our constituents. It's very, very vital to our success. And we could talk about money and metrics and all of the glitzy stuff, but success is success. It's like I came into this with a mission statement. I want to X. I want to Y. And I did it, right? And it's a journey, like Tamika said, it's a journey. So we are pleased to be on this journey with you. I know Tamika's going to go over this next slide, and we may have Lamont come up and say some final words.
We've had some questions. Oh, Lamont, you want to go first?
No. I was just laughing. I'm too relaxed to go anywhere right
Yeah,
now.
Lamont's still at the beach. Let's be clear. Lamont is still at the beach.
Oh man, this is go ahead, Tamika, go ahead.
And for the sake of time, we might not have time, and we've gotten a lot of takeaways already, but again, we do have a few more minutes. If there's something else you want to share before you leave the room, you're welcome to do that, but be intentional in thinking about what your number 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 takeaways have been today and how you will convert that into action. That's so important for Summer and I. We don't want to be just informational and motivational. We want to be activational. Like, we want you to convert things into action. We want you to shift your mindset, to pivot how you do certain things, how you interact with people. That's what will make this webinar a success, is the action that you take after today, after this moment. So we've had a few people ask us, how you can get in touch with us. We are Kabod Consulting Group. You can reach us at www.kabodconsults.com. We are on Instagram. We are on LinkedIn. We are on Facebook at all of these different handles here. So please feel free to engage with us, to sign up on our website so that you can be notified of upcoming events, webinars, workshops, different opportunities. We'd love to stay engaged with you. And thank you all for all of your encouragement and motivation as we work through this presentation with you today. Sometimes this work is heavy, especially with us being entrepreneurs as well, but being in spaces like this that have been so encouraging and inspiring to us. I know I can speak for Summer as well. We say thank you for that, for motivating us to do and be more after today as well. So with that, I'm going to, and Lamont, someone also asked how can they stay connected to Jumpstart. So if you can also share that and your final thoughts, that would be great.
Absolutely. I'm still trying to wake up. I'm serious. that Danielle, I don't know how you do that, but that was a guy's practice. That really was very interesting. So, and having it happen in the middle of the day, I'm not sure I really want to go back to work, but we'll figure it out. First of all, I got to say thank you to all three of you. Just outstanding work. But you know, Chanel is letting me sort of take the lead here, but I want to call her out because Chanel was the party that really put all of this together. You know, I did a small part. Yeah, to give her a hand for those of us who experienced this today. She was a major player in it. Chanel, do you want to say anything? You've been quiet all day.
I actually just put something in the chat, but I wanted to really say thank you to Tamika and Summer. Thank you to the audience. Thank you to the panelists. I think that this is a really great conversation. And it's one of the things that we were thinking about when putting this on, was bringing trauma to the forefront. We know that there is a lot of trauma in the world currently going on, and people are experiencing trauma from every different angle. Just due to the current climate. But we thought that it was very important for us to do this, as well as just to bring light to it. So many times, especially in some of the minority communities, we don't talk about our traumas. Or when we talk about our traumas, we don't necessarily talk about ways to escape those traumas or to heal from those traumas. So I think that this has been a really good webinar for us. And I hope that if anybody is hoping to get connected to Jumpstart, you will start by going to our website at www.jumpstartinc.org. If you're looking for if you're a small business, you can click on small business and then click for apply for assistance. And it'll take you directly there. We'll also put the link in the in the chat as well. But I really do appreciate the time today. And this has been wonderful. So thanks, Lamont.
No, thank you, Chanel, for operationally putting everything together. Your concept of this, your engagement, of course, with our guests and consulting and what the consulting work that they do and with the job they did today, outstanding. So on behalf of Jumpstart also, just generally, I want to say thank you, Tamika. Thank you, Summer. Thank you, Danielle. This has just been fantastic. And I do see for all of the other people on this virtual presentation, I do see us continuing this. I think you said something about a quarterly sort of rhythm. I'm going to definitely look at my budget and what we can do to look at topics like this topic that you all can help us facilitate. So let's talk more about that because we need healthy entrepreneurs in order to be successful entrepreneurs, and taking care of ourselves is a big piece of how that's going to happen, as well as the families that are affected by it as well as our communities are affected by it. So we need to continue this. But so thank you so much. This is great. I took lots of notes. Obviously got a lot of things to work on. Until from my notes that I took, I think my wife is going to be real pleased with the fact that I took good notes. So, and, you know, this has been fantastic. It's been great. The other thing, Chanel did say how you can reach us through our website. All of us at Jumpstart, and you may see some others on the chat and etc. You know, it's simply our first name with a dot in between it, and then jumpstartinc.org will get you to us at jumpstartinc.org. So it's another just quick way to get our attention. We'll make sure that people connect if they need to connect with us. So please feel free to do that. So again, thank you so much. I want to thank all of the parties that have been participants and who actually engaged in this process, utilized the chat and asked questions, and also became vulnerable during the process. We appreciate that. It's helpful for everybody, and I'm glad people participated the way they did. So thank you very much, audience, for doing that. And Freddie in the background and marketing, hey, marketing and Freddie, we thank you so much. Appreciate it. Things went very, very well. Usually if something happened, it's an operator's error, not not you all, or Zoom error maybe. So thank you so much for this great presentation. I think it went absolutely wonderful from a logistic standpoint, and certainly from you all from the content standpoint. So Tamika or Summer or Danielle, if you want to say anything final, we can wrap this up.
I just want to say thank you, and let's just stay vigilant and intentional about working through our traumas so we can be our best selves.
Great final statement. Tamika?
I'm just going to echo what Summer said. Thank you, Lamont, for the opportunity. Thank you, Chanel, for thinking of us. You know, we're never dismissive of that. There are hundreds of trauma practitioners and webinar facilitators that you could have chosen from. So the fact that you thought about us means a lot to us. And we're so grateful for everything that's going on in the chat and the feedback. Walking away knowing that all of us have been inspired and remotivated. And again, that's always the goal. So just an immense thank you for pouring into us today as much as we've poured into you.
Fantastic. And I'm not going to let Danielle speak because she's going to make me go to sleep again. So. Now, Danielle, do you have something you'd like to say? But don't put me to sleep.
I just want to thank everyone for the opportunity, and please know that if you have questions even after this presentation is over, I'll be available for the next hour. So feel free to call me at 667-205-9859. And I'm here to support you any way that I can.
Fantastic. Well, to everyone, I want to say thank you for your participation. Thank you for your presentation, for all the presenters. Thank you for being vulnerable today. And thank you for just being a participant in this great event. And we wish everybody the best, and stay tuned for more from Jumpstart and more from these consultants and their beautiful opportunity to share and wonderful experiences they shared with us today. So with that, have a great day, and we'll see you around the corner.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.